Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 129 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the I screwed up the line.
The coach. That's my new nickname.
I was gonna say the co-judge of this chili cook-off, and then I forgot what the co was.
Trevor,
take two.
Trevor, are you coming to the cook-off?
I forgot about that.
That would be good, because that's like that. Then they could actually hype it up like it's like a competition, you know, and all of the wrestlers are making chili. They're just making chili, eating chili. I feel like actually maybe for like, you know, a WrestleMania next year, they could actually have like a wrestler chili cook-off, and they make chili. And if they make a vegan chili, I'm there. I'll try that wrestler's vegan chili. Which wrestler do you think would make a vegan chili? Don't say Bryan Danielson. He's not. He's not on the roster.
I don't even know what other wrestlers are vegan. Maybe Chris Statlander for some reason. I don't even know if she's vegan.
You do not have to be vegan to make vegan chili, Trevor.
If you hate your taste buds, maybe. No, I know. You can make good vegan.
What if the whole podcast was just us doing that? I'm not
just in Peanuts teacher voice.
Yeah, I'm not editing that out. And by the way, I am gonna run with this coach nickname now.
You're Mr. Perfect's new manager,
yes.
Coach. You're Craig T. You have always been the Craig T. Nelson of this show, and I have always been the Jerry Van Dyke. That is absolutely the case.
I like to think of myself more as a dauber. I don't mean that as any sort of like double entendre or anything, but
I've always seen you as the bingo dauber of this show. But anyway, let's get to the show, and we have no news between the last show and this show, because the last show was the day before this show. That's right, we are covering the Chicago Spectacular Night 2. It took place November 9th, 2006 at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago Ridge, Illinois, for a reported crowd of 600 fans, which is roughly the same amount as the night before. Same building, same city. But there was a change, and both the major newsletters of the time noticed it. Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer, the entire second night was rebooked because of the weak crowd reactions on the first night. And that's something I believe Gabe wrote like years after the fact on a MySpace journal he briefly had after he left Ring of Honor. And some of those you can find if you dig real hard. I couldn't find that one. I would have loved to get more context, but I do remember this show was famous for Gabe like tearing things up and being like, that crowd was dead. This doesn't feel good. Let's shift things.
Which is always going to be strange to me, just given how many shows we've watched recently with dead crowds. But I guess in the building, it came off even stronger than it did on DVD. That's the only thing I could think of.
There must have been a general vibe that Gabe was starting to feel, because I believe we'll have something in a few episodes, like at the start of 2007. Oh, I think it's when Morishima wins the world title, where they said part of the reason why is Gabe just felt like we need to shake things up. Like things are getting a little bit stagnant in some ways. And if you've been listening to this podcast, I think you can make a pretty clear case that things have gotten more than a little bit stagnant. But I think that tells you that, you know, this is the period where that's probably inspiring that decision. So Gabe must be seeing some of what we're seeing, at least some of it, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you can go through the bitter end and not be like, oh, this is really bad. Like something bad is going on here. Like this is not what ROH has ever been before. So yeah, I could see that for sure.
And then the PW Torch would write about the show. Most fans in attendance for both nights noted that the crowd was much hotter for this event than they were for the show on the previous night, which is very much true, almost shockingly so. Like this isn't an amazing crowd, but it is like a night and day difference over the night before, which is kind of crazy when you have to consider this is a lot of the same people going both nights. This is the second straight night of wrestling for those people. I would argue, like, even though we'll get to, I think this show in watching it is better than the night before. On paper, the card isn't as thrilling as the night before. You know, you're not getting any match as big as Joe Danielson in a cage, and yet, this is the hotter crowd.
I don't notice that big of a difference until like the last couple matches. Like I feel like the second half of the show, the crowd picks up a lot. The first half of the show did not really feel that different to me, honestly.
I thought the crowd was at least reacting a little bit to everything, where the first night there was times where I was like, man, this crowd is just dead for things that I feel like should be getting reactions. Where I felt like generally when I was watching this show, if something got I felt like deserved a reaction, it got some kind of reaction. Maybe not always an amazing reaction, but I was at least like, oh, people are popping for this thing at least somewhat.
Well,
But
by the end of the show, I can say like it almost felt like with that main event, like they almost like broke a curse or something, like a months-long curse as far as the way the crowd was reacting to that match.
which again is impressive after like a full night of wrestling. To often the crowd dips for the main event, but there were two matches we didn't get to see, both dark matches, both tag team matches. The first one was Alex Payne and Bobby Dempsey defeating Johnny Dynamo and Rhett Titus in 5 minutes, 8 seconds. Chris Vetter wrote into the PW Torch with a live report, and he wrote, and this guy, Chris Vetter had been to a bunch of these Ring of Honor shows. He was a frequent live reporter, and he wrote, perhaps the best ROH student dark match I've seen. So high praise. And the second dark match was Team Underground of Chandler McClure and Eric Priest defeated Ernie Osiris and Mitch Franklin in 2 minutes, 53 seconds. Imagine you're a student trying to get some ring time, trying to get some experience, and you can't even get 3 minutes for a 4-person tag match. I mean, it's rough all over. But we opened the show proper on the DVD with Shane Hagedorn and Adam Pearce backstage. Shane tells Adam Pearce that he watched his promo last night and it took his breath away. He says it did things to him and he can't wait to see Adam put the strap to Homicide. Adam says if it's safe to say that Shane was humbled by his promo, Shane says in fact he was humbled. So yes, folks, this was 2006, back when every third thing had to reference the Iron Sheik humbling promo. Adam Pearce then pledges to Jim Cornette, who he says I know is watching at home, that the beating on Homicide that Jim started many shows ago will end tonight in his honor. Pearce moves on to Pele Primo, who he calls the midget of Ring of Honor. He wants a shot at Shane Hagedorn for the top of the class trophy, but Pearce just asks Shane, like, what are you going to do about this Pele Primo? Shane says for 2 years he's been beating Pele's butt in training, in the pre-shows, and on the main shows now. And Adam says, how about we teach Pele a little lesson tonight? And they're going to teach him a little lesson.
It was nice of Adam Pearce to give Hagedorn a chance to cut his own promo on his own rival, as opposed to just, doing his major program with Homicide as the promo. Also, Hagedorn was holding the top of the class trophy, and I have to say, while looking at it, it's no Matt F trophy, It's not good. And actually, I may rename it the Coach Matt F trophy now that we are onto that, but we'll get to that later.
Have you ever actually had, like, other than like a gift from your great friends for the power of being you, which is the most honorable thing that should be honored about Matt Forrest, because anyone that listens to the show knows Matt is a great person. Oh. But have you ever gotten like a trophy for something else? Because I'll admit this, I have never gotten a trophy for any. I've gotten ribbons. I have never won a trophy.
I've gotten like certificates. I feel like I did get trophies when I was a kid, but I feel like they were just like sort of like the dreaded participation trophies you get for just like being in a league and not actually having won anything. That feels like the only trophies that I got. Although I did, a couple friends did get me trophies, not just for the Matt F trophy, just for being 40, but also for my friends got a trophy when I passed the 1-year mark on the New York Times crossword streak, which that's, wow. I have very nice friends, and I don't know why they think that trophies are a great thing to give, but I'm not complaining. You know what I mean?
When you live in a major city in an apartment, what you really want is a lot of useless hardware to really have to make room for it.
Yeah, I mean, these are pretty small trophies. I mean, let's be honest, but
cheapskates.
Yeah, no, I know.
See, you can't win with me.
It's you know what? My trophy might be smaller than Shane Hagedorn's trophy, but it's what you do with the trophy that matters. You know what I mean?
I know exactly, Matt. It's not the size of it. I say that a lot to people, but cut elsewhere backstage to Shingo, who says, Dragon Gate, my friend comes soon. So yes, he doesn't say the name, but Shima will be coming in for the next double shot. Lacey walks in and says she knows Shingo wrestles Colt Cabana tonight, and says if he hurts Colt, Lacey's Angels will pay him a lot of money. She says Lacey's Angels makes a lot of money. And I want to be clear here. She says they make a lot of money. Not that she has a lot of money because she's rich from a pre-existing thing. They make a lot of money, which like blew my mind. I keep trying to think, how do they make a lot of money? You have one client. He doesn't win a lot. He doesn't have a title. Like, how are you making money?
I have a theory, Trevor.
How was that?
So remember,
Jimmy Jacobs male gigolo?
Well, no. Remember when Lacey's Angels was formed, it was a splinter group from Special K, and she went with the Special K people that were into drugs. And I think that she sells drugs. And that is how they make money. And that is Lacey's Angels. They are drug dealers, and that's bad, in my opinion. That's why they're bad guys. But also, my favorite part of the promo is when she goes to Shingo. It's like, we want to hurt him. Comprende? And then she looks into the camera and she's like, wait, that's not Japanese.
And I like at the very end of the promo, she goes, do you understand me? And Shingo does, because he does the universal rubbing your fingers together motion for money. So yes. I like that. That's transcends culture. That
yes, for sure.
Rubbing that, most of us have paper currency. Although I guess in Canada we have plastic currency now. Our bills are not paper anymore. But
you ever do that? You ever do that with money? You ever just walk around, take a bill, and just start rubbing it in your fingers?
Yes, and then I immediately Purell because of all those stories of like how much just awful is apparently sticks to every coin and bill you could possibly get. It's like the only thing like second to money apparently is perhaps like a Hotel 8 bed, apparently. Like you put a black light over the stuff. But yes, I do love that.
Well, germs die after the many hundreds of people wipe their butt with that dollar bill you're about to use.
I hear $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase never got sick. He built a natural immunity from all those germs. But
well, we know that people who are millionaires use mostly cash.
Yeah, exactly. So we then go to the ring where Colt Cabana makes his entrance and grabs a mic. He said, yeah, Chicago, how they're doing? And they're doing okay. Colt wants to talk about a certain situation with a certain high heel with a certain broad who has a certain vaginal disease. That's what Colt says. He recaps being attacked in the balls with said high heel by Lacey with the help of Brent Albright and Jimmy Jacobs. Colt says sexual activity is still okay, which prompts a pop from the crowd, including one woman in the crowd who was very excited to hear that Colt could still have sex. And then Colt says, and this kind of, again, talk about things that promos that blew my mind a little. Colt says, urination is not so okay, though. And I wrote my notes, okay, I can believe a lot of things in pro wrestling, but in what world after you get stomped in the balls so bad you can't piss right, you go, I've got to check off. Like, how do you know, like, I can come okay, but I can't piss? Like, what night did he have last night? But, I don't know.
Somebody had to cheer him up,
Exactly. Colt says he's got a match tonight with Shingo, but that's not on his mind because while he may not have all of his testicles, he wants to fight Jimmy Jacobs right here, right now, and he's calling him out.
Tough couple months for Colt. Loses a toe, loses a testicle.
Yeah, the Drano incident the year before, Ring of Honor, the man who takes the biggest beating in Ring of Honor, clearly Colt Cabana, secretly. But Jimmy comes out in street clothes with Lacey and races into the ring to start brawling with him. Lacey pulls Colt off Jimmy at one point by the hair and then low blows him in his injured testicles. Daisy Hayes comes in then and lays Lacey out with a heart punch and a running boot. Jimmy Jacobs goes to attack Daisy Hayes, but BJ Whitmer runs in to save her. Shingo, Bryan Danielson, and Jimmy Rave run in from the back to attack the babyfaces before Delirious and Nigel McGuinness run in to make the save. Everyone briefly brawls in the ring and the crowd chants ROH before the heels bail to the floor. Bryan Danielson at this point yells to Jimmy Rave, Jimmy, they broke my watch, those bastards. And he is in fact holding a watch, like has a watch on his wrist. So I'm wondering if that is a shoot watch break. I don't feel like that would be like for some reason I bet you that was real, that he really somehow broke his watch in there. Colt grabs the mic and we see Jimmy Jacobs is bleeding badly from like the side of I guess I would say not maybe the eye, but the temple right near the eye. Colt says they want Jimmy eliminated. Nigel wants to eliminate Jimmy Rave. Delirious wants to eliminate American Dragon. Colt says Chicago wants to eliminate Shingo's mullet. And at ringside, Bryan Danielson just says no, and he starts stroking Shingo's mullet to soothe him. Colt says, screw it. We're throwing it all out the window. Tonight we're going to do an 8-man elimination match, and they could do it right now. Jimmy Jacobs takes off his belt. He tries to get back in the ring, but Bryan stops him, screaming, Jimmy, I'm team leader. Get the fuck back there. We'll take them later. Like, just really assertively. And Jimmy listens. And so, yeah, this was part of Gabe's trying to jigger the card, because originally this was supposed to be a 3-on-3 match, in the main event, and Shingo and Colt was supposed to be a separate singles match. And Gabe, I guess, decided it'd be more interesting if we do a 4-on-4 in elimination tag. And that ends up being your main event for tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I like this. This segment, I don't think was like some amazing segment or anything, but it felt a bit lively and made things feel a little bit more unpredictable in a positive way. As far as Danielson talking about the watch, I'm guessing the Bryan Danielson in 2006, and definitely still now, is probably was not walking around with like Ric Flair style, like fancy Rolex watches. So I'm guessing that broken watch is probably like, I don't know, didn't cost him that much, right? But maybe it was an heirloom from a relative. Who knows? The other thing is, Cabana talked about how Chicago wanted to eliminate Shingo's mullet. Well, 18 years later, mullet still has not been eliminated, has it?
No, like, credit to Shingo. He is stuck with that. In terms of Bryan Danielson watches, even though this did not look like the watch he had on, it kind of broke my heart, because I would love to believe if Bryan Danielson was a watch guy, he would have one of those like really cheap, like digital watches that has like the little solar panels on it. Like, I would love just to believe that is a Bryan Danielson watch. I think I had one of those when I was a kid.
Yeah, I'm not a watch guy either, but the one watch I ever wore regularly, a friend gave me a blue plastic Bart Simpson watch, and I wore that for a couple of years until it broke. And I wish I still had it, because I would still wear it.
I am so jealous of you right now. But I will say, like, I agree, like, this was not an earth-shattering segment, but like you, I agree that this brought some energy in. And it's one of those things I think we've talked about occasionally before, where this is a segment in another wrestling promotion would be super kind of boilerplate, like you've seen it a million times. But in Ring of Honor, it's a little fresher because they hardly ever do this. Because this is like a U.S. TV wrestling start of Raw or whatever style segment, basically, right? Where it's like a bunch of pre-existing feuds get into a random brawl to start the show, and they decide, we're going to make a match tonight based on that. And you've seen that a million times, but Ring of Honor, it's actually kind of rare that they do this kind of impromptu,
right?
We're changing things up, and also, everyone's after everybody kind of match.
And also, an ROH show is not usually booked like a TV show; it's booked more like a pay-per-view, and it's very rare to find pay-per-views at any company that start like that, where they just kind of like throw out the format, right?
Yeah, and this will not be the end of the in-ring changes to tonight's card. So, next up in our main card opener, Ace Steel defeated Tank Toland via pinfall in 8 minutes 25 seconds via a small package. So, quite the weekend for Tank Toland. Kikataro, Ace Steel. What'd you think about this, man?
Oof. I guess this match did not show any extra fire from the night before. This was just very little to this match. I'd say everything cool came from Ace Steel. I think my takeaway after this match was Tank Toland needs to step it up a bit. He is not really doing much to impress. I think he does last a little while in ROH. Like, not like he's not gone like in a couple months. Like, he still shows up and he's part of Sweet and Sour Inc., right? But he's not really showing me much here. The crowd starts chanting "Beat that dick," which, because he was part of the Dicks, I will allow it. It is an okay chant with me. But they Tank is being a power guy, and Ace tries to shoulder block him, tries to stand up to him, and Tank does wrestle a little bit more. And Tank just does very basic offense for most of the match. And he poses to the crowd, and at one point even Gabe describes a leaping knee drop springing off the bottom rope as, quote, very basic but very effective, like to the point where Gabe had to make note that Toland's offense is very basic. He hits power slams. He does hit a pretty cool over-the-shoulder DDT, almost like Xavier style. And But eventually, Ace comes back in the ring. Tank catches him on his shoulders, and Ace turns it into a cradle for a flash pin. I was actually surprised that Ace won because I thought they were building up Tank here. But yeah, the match was basically nothing. In fact, the most noteworthy part of the match was Jimmy Bauer continuing to beg Lenny Leonard to take his job back, and Prazak saying he's not able to drink while he has to do a full show on commentary because that's part of the rules and regulations. But I was just thinking, like, if Jimmy Bauer doesn't want the job anyway, why doesn't he just drink? Right? Like, it's like you're not allowed to drink if you're going to keep this job that you don't want, that you're begging someone else to take. So it's like, well, just drink then. Obviously,
he's too much of a company man, Matt. He's
Obviously-
torn between his. Oh, I was just going to say his love of duty and his love of the drink.
Well, obviously they need him, so he has the leverage here. That's what I'm saying. He could drink. Call their bluff, Jimmy Bauer. Call their bluff.
Matt Feuerstein encourages a fictional alcoholic to drink more.
I'm a union man. I'm pro workers' rights. Like Hangman Adam Page.
So I think, Matt, you did a great job summing up this match. I might have liked it a scotch bit more than you, Matt, but I think you summed it up perfectly when you described it as basic. Because I know I've said Tank Toland's wrestling is a little basic for ROH. I think Ace Steel is another one of the more basic guys on the ROH roster at this point, although way more indie modern than Tank Toland. And Ace was in, I would say that tag match he was in the night before was like the most basic match of that night. And so I was going to say, guess what this match was, Matt, based on all that complicated state of the art action. But no, it was incredibly basic. And I was going to note, like you said, which was like Gabe actually outright says like very basic at one point. So yeah, there isn't a ton to the match. I thought the action was fine. Again, it's basic. Like Ace broke out his nice senton, which I always think is pretty nice and kind of underrated. I thought the crowd reactions for this match, like they were fine considering like this was worse than a bunch of what they saw the night before. And I felt bad when Tank took 2 tries to bridge out of a pinfall. For some reason, I just found that heartbreaking because I felt like here's a guy, this crowd's on him on every show, this Ring of Honor crowd. They're chanting steroids and dick at him all the time. And, his one strength is his strength. And now even that fails him. He can't bridge out, right? He missed neck day, unfortunately. I felt bad for him. I did like the finishing sequence. It was not spectacular, but it was fairly neat by the standards of this match where they're fighting for a superplex, and Ace like willingly drops off the top turnbuckle to the floor, and he drives Tank's throat onto the top rope on the way down. Not quite a hot shot, but just pulling it down. I thought that looked cool. And then Ace tries to springboard back in, and like you said, Tank catches him on his shoulders. He's going to go for a move, but Ace turns that into a small package for the win. I would call this like a very low average to me. Like it was just pleasant enough and just short enough to get into average. And maybe I was just kind of relieved that I felt like, oh, the crowd's a little bit better already. And, it's a new day, Matt. And so I was okay, but I was happy by that. But
it's a new day. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. And then we returned backstage where we were joined by Christopher Daniels, Matt Sydal, and Allison Danger. Daniels mentions how tonight was set to be a momentous occasion, the first title defense of Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal's tag belts. But Matt hurt his knee. And Matt, before we get to the rest of this promo, I have to say, we've talked a lot on this show about how Through the Years seems to predict things, or when something happens in Through the Years timeline, it's happening in the real life timeline. This has to be one of the crazier ones because literally the day we were reviewing a show where Matt Sydal had to pull out due to an injury, Matt Sydal posts on Twitter that he's about today to get a surgery on his foot that he's been putting off for like a decade and a half.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. You're breaking news to me.
Yeah, like he famously had like a bad foot. Like he said, like they're gonna have to like re-break bones in my foot and like use metal to like line up the toes and all this stuff. But he was like, it's been famously like he's been working on this for a long time. But he said like I've been in pain for I forget it was 10 or 15 years, but it was like at least a decade, I think. And he's like, I'm finally gonna get the surgery today. And like a crazy coincidence. Yeah.
I did not remember that Matt Sydal started acting heelish this early.
Yeah, that's a great transition where Sydal's very cocky. He cockily says, in fact, that when you're a star athlete like himself, you need your body to be 100%. And then he brags about reversing the KRS-One to win the tag titles. He goes, no one else on the planet could do that. And then he says, Seidel says, tonight it's important that we protect the investment. And Daniels and Allison Danger are both like just stare at each other as Seidel's getting very braggy with a little stunned with a little bit of that like, what the fuck, expression on their faces. But then Chris quickly moves on to introducing Matt Seidel's replacement in tonight's tag match, Matt Cross. Daniels puts over Cross's recent performances against him in a singles match and last night's four-way. Matt Cross's the tag match is the opportunity he's been waiting for. Seidel then cockily says, that's the enthusiasm I like. Good luck, kid, and walks out as the other three just stare at him again with like that what the fuck style expression. So yeah, like you, I forgot that they were like almost immediately after they win the tag titles. Like I remember when we were covering the show the night before, the last show, I was like, oh, Seidel's kind of surprisingly cocky here. I didn't realize, that was them this weekend. They had clearly decided we were going to push him in that direction.
Yeah, I know that he's still a babyface like 6 months later. So I don't know if they like stopped, they started and then stopped, or if it was just like a steady progression. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
And that brings us to the 6-man mayhem match. Jake Crist defeated CJ Otis, Dave Crist, Kikutaro, and Pele Primo, and Trick Davis in 8 minutes, 20 seconds after he pinned CJ Otis after the Irish Air Raid.
The stars are out for this one.
To quote the late, great Canadian sports broadcaster Darren Drager, who recently passed away, someone hit me in the head with a frying pan so I can see some stars. I always thought that was one of his greatest lines. But to be fair, I thought this was entertaining but bizarre. On paper, it's your usual newcomers and low-card guys scramble match, but I thought there were some interesting quirks to it. First off, you have Kikutaro in a scramble match, but not just Kikutaro in a scramble match, but Kikutaro basically being the focal point of a scramble match. Like, I think he's in the ring for half of this match, if not more of it. And he does a lot of comedy, but it pretty much all landed for me. Like, again, this is the kind of stuff I'm a sucker for Kikutaro. I liked when he kept running into the corner and Trick Davis kept getting his foot up and he got tired of charging to Kikutaro's boot. So then he whips the ref into Trick Davis. But the highlight for Kikutaro on this match, I have to call the spot out. This spot is so purposely business exposing. I was kind of shocked by how audacious it was. So I think it's one of the Crists are in the tree of woe, hang upside down in the corner. And Kikutaro starts kicking him in the midsection as he's upside down. But he's clearly slapping the Chris thigh as he kicks him to do the thigh slap. And it was a little bit goofy. But I thought, hey, maybe he's just doing that, because it's convenient. That thigh is closer to him than his own thigh. But then he immediately starts slapping his own thigh during kicks, but he's doing it purposely late and early. So it's like way mistimed. Like clearly he's doing it on purpose as a joke. And it's so fucking ridiculous that even Gabe seems taken aback by it on commentary. Like at one point he just goes, note to the office, make sure Bill Watts does not see this DVD ever. He's just like, yeah. He's like just winking like, holy shit, he's doing this, isn't he?
But he definitely enjoyed it. You could tell Gabe thought it was fun.
And then you have CJ Otis here, and CJ Otis was a IWA Mid-South kind of regular who was making his ROH main card debut here. He had been on a couple pre-show matches before this, and he got to do almost nothing here, to the point where I felt like, why'd you even book him? Like, even by the standards of an 8-minute, 6-man scramble, he did I think he hits a few strikes. He does a big German suplex on Pele Primo, and he is in the ring late so he can take the pin. And at one point, like when CJ's in the ring, Gabe excitedly shouts like, I want to see more of CJ Otis. And I thought, well, you won't really, because you put him in a 4-way the next time you come back to Chicago. He has a dark match in 2008, and that's it. So, like, you didn't want to see a lot more of CJ Otis, apparently, even though he'd, look perfectly fine here. Also, CJ Otis, they mentioned this on commentary, is trained by Sabu. But if you go to Cage Match and look up Otis's trainers, Matt, it's one of the oddest collections of a foursome you may find for a wrestler's trainers. These are the 4 people who Cage Match says train CJ Otis: Sabu, Dan Severn, Scott D'Amore, and Kaz Hayashi. Matt, it takes a village to raise a family, or apparently to train CJ Otis. But
I wonder if they all were doing it together. Maybe they all opened a school together we just didn't know about.
I would love if that was like a 3-man, a baby style sitcom, like just them running a wrestling school together. But Sabu and Dan could bond over mustaches, definitely. But the big weirdness to me in this was, I gotta say, was Irish Airborne's usage in this match. Like, Gabe early on notes that, we might see the Irish Airborne fight each other in this match because it's everyone for themselves, which is the common thing you do in matches where a lot of people are in and tag partners are in, but one fall to a finish where, it's like the Royal Rumble and stuff. We're like, hey, are we going to see a partner against partner? And instead, they don't do a single spot against each other the whole match. They actually do some of their double team offense moves together. And at first I thought, okay, this makes sense. Like, your tag team partners take advantage of that chemistry, work together until it comes down to the two of you. And instead, the very end of this match is they hit their double team finisher, the Irish Air Raid, on CJ Otis. And then Jake Crist pins CJ Otis. And not only does Dave Crist not try and break up the pin, he stands next to them and like plays defense. Like, he's looking around to make sure if anyone tries to come to break up the pin, he'll stop them. And it's like, I just thought that was such a bizarre finish and even the commentator was just like, well, I guess Dave lets his brother win. It was just like, it was a weird, you don't very often see that in wrestling where you do the partners in the same match and they never touch. And one is like almost helping, not almost helping the other win the match. It was really weird. And then add into that, you have the Irish Airborne, basically both of them win this match. This is the last match they have in Ring of Honor for half a year. So, like, why they won, I don't know. I would have kind of liked to have seen Pele win because, he had won a multi-man match before recently. He could use some momentum. It seems like they're like pushing him as a main card character a bit more at this point. So, but I just thought, why put them over when you're not going to book them for half a year? And when they do come back, they're basically like occasional enhancement talent when they do come back. But as a match, I will just say I thought this was enjoyable, like above average. It's short. There have been scrambles with a faster pace that have been crazier, but this was basically just people doing entertaining things from start to finish, being like Kikutaro's comedy or some of your usual scrambly spots. And I thought it's the kind of match where, even though I know it's second on the card because it's such low-level guys, I feel like this is the kind of match that would have been a great palate cleanser on a card between two really draining, like, top-tier matches, because it is the kind of match where I feel like it could fall anything because of the comedy and because it being so quick and kind of light entertainment. But I enjoyed this somewhat, Matt.
Yeah, I would say it overachieved given its like level of star power and stuff. Nobody looked bad here at all, I would say. I actually like the finish, like, because you don't see that often. Like, two guys that are in a tag team together, like, it makes sense that they would be like, hey, maybe one of us can win. Okay, which one? Maybe they flipped a coin backstage, and said, okay, we're going to make sure that you win, right? Like,
I hope they wash their hands.
But I don't know. I think that actually makes sense to me, and it's interesting that doesn't happen more often, and I don't mind it. I think it's actually kind of a cool, novel approach to doing a situation like that. Kikutaro did do a lot of comedy, obviously, but I would say he did more non-comedy stuff in this match than we've seen from him also. In fact, he, like, at the beginning when he first comes in, he takes like a minute or so before he starts doing any kind of comedy. And then of course he does the thigh slap thing. He does some Ric Flair spots. He does a rope walk but gets crotched mid applause, which I enjoy. But he also does some, cool wrestling stuff, like the part where he military presses Primo all the way to the floor, right? Like, that's pretty cool. And I did like some of the, the dives. You're right, we didn't see much from Otis, but I do think what we saw from him was pretty good. He did a couple cool moves. And it is interesting to me that Gabe was so impressed with him and still didn't book him after. Like, you'd think if Gabe is impressed with him, that's it, right? He gets booked. So it's very, like, I would love to know the story there. Like, does he just kind of like forget, or are there just other people that take priority, or was there something that happened? It's always interesting to some of these indies you just never find out, right? Because it's just not well reported on. Maybe you'd have to just ask CJ Otis himself. But I thought this was fine and entertaining for what it was. Served its purpose.
Then for anyone watching this, there's a moment before the match that I thought was very cute, where Trick Davis makes his ring entrance, and someone in the crowd must have gave him a compliment, because I don't hear what the person said, but Trick is like, "What did you say?" Like, 'cause he didn't quite hear it. And when he hears it the second time, he thanks the person in this like most sweet, earnest way that made me think like whatever he heard, he was genuinely touched by. It was like, "Oh, thanks for that." Like, I was like, "What? I gotta know what this guy." But like in that moment, Trick Davis just seemed like the nicest guy. I was like, oh, wrestling needs a dose of niceness. And like, unfortunately, whenever like I praise a wrestler for being nice, it feels like I'm now scarred by the BJ Whitmer situation, that where like the one time we gave BJ Whitmer some flowers, like the very before the next show was like, oh, here's like the worst thing.
Well,
BJ Whitmer's involved.
we were praising his wrestling performance,
Yes.
not him as a person.
Well,
So,
see, now I'm saying Trick Davis seems nice. So, like, if the story comes out tomorrow, like Trick Davis drives school bus full of children off cliff, like, I have no cover this time, man. I'm sticking my neck out here for Trick Davis. That's what I'm saying.
Driving a school bus off a cliff. So not only is he driving a school bus, but he lives in a town with cliffs.
What kind of town doesn't have a good cliff, Matt? I mean, where are you going to make out on a date if you don't have a cliff?
Well, they probably at least have somebody named Cliff. Does your town have a cliff that you could think of, Trevor?
There are definitely hills I could hike up. Actually, there used to be very steep hills that I would hike up actually occasionally, and I don't know the difference between a hill and a cliff. Matt, I think what we're learning is I'm not outdoorsy, and between our lack of trophies, we're also not very sportsy. It's a wonder we're even interested in pro wrestling.
I don't think that a hill and a cliff are the same thing, but okay.
Well, a cliff is like a hill when it grows up, right?
Don't think that's like you're thinking of a mountain, maybe. Anyway, let's move on.
Matt, I climb mountains regularly. Anyway, I've already told Matt to edit one thing out. I'm not going to tell him to edit that out, but boy, I'm going to look bad to the cliff experts on this listening to the show. But after the match,
experts listening to the show.
After the match, everyone leaves the ring but Pele, who is still selling. Shane Hagedorn marches to the ring carrying his top-of-the-class trophy. He grabs the mic and he demands Pele look at him. He's pissed that Primo had the gall to issue a challenge to him yesterday for the top-of-the-class trophy. Hagedorn says, I'll give you another shot at it right now, and he asks for a handshake. Pele, being poor, gullible, lovable Pele, does shake his hand. And at that point, Adam Pearce sneaks into the ring, whips Pele with a strap. The crowd immediately starts chanting for Homicide. Hagedorn and Pearce hit Pele with a spike pile driver, and Adam Pearce grabs the mic and calls out Homicide to come out right now, and Homicide does. And that's one of my favorite things in wrestling, where people call for someone to make a save, and they do come out, but not to make the save. Like, in theory, Homicide just doesn't care, or maybe, he was busy, going to the bathroom, enjoying a corn dog or whatever. But like, it's just always funny to me when like someone doesn't make the save, but like 10 seconds later they're out there. So yeah, Homicide comes out. He attacks Hagedorn in the ring. Pearce bails to the outside. Homicide hits Shane with a couple of moves and asks the ref to ring the bell, and he does, leading to an impromptu match. We get Homicide defeating Shane Hagedorn via pinfall in a minute 42 after he hit the cop killer. CageMatch.com has this listed as a strap match, but don't you believe it, dear listener, because there is no strap in this match at all.
It is the strapless match.
Yeah,
I guess Homicide might have had shoulder straps under his shirt, but I can't. He was wearing a shirt. Can't tell.
This is why you listen to Through the Years, because we correct the record in the most important of aspects. But this was just a squash match. Shane gets a tiny bit of offense, but only after Homicide basically distracts himself by pulling out his ghetto fork. And at that point, Hagedorn is able to attack him. Well, as I wrote in my notes, while Homicide's attention is on the utensil. Matt, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. Obviously, this was just a squash.
Yeah, it was an angle. I don't know if it was totally necessary, but they could have just cut the promo. But I guess, they wanted to just give Homicide a few extra moments of dominance.
Yeah, and immediately after the match, Adam Pearce again attacks Homicide, and as soon as Homicide regains control, Pearce bails to the floor. Homicide grabs Pierce's strap that he brought to the ring, and he grabs the mic as Pierce holds Hagedorn at ringside like a baby in his arms. Homicide says he's tired of Pierce jumping him. The strap match shit is weak. He doesn't want this. He tosses the strap down. He says, I saw a cage in the ring truck, and the crowd pops huge for this. Homicide wants to face Pierce in a steel cage match tonight. The crowd chants ROH as we cut away. So yeah, that's our other big in-the-ring. We're changing the booking on the fly tonight because Gabe's shuffling things. We're getting upgraded from a strap match to a steel cage match.
No.
Matt, go on.
Now, this one, I'm not sure how I feel about it.
I agree.
They built up that strap match for a long time. Have they had any other strap matches in ROH before?
They've had the dog collar match with Jimmy Raven Punk, or was it Punk and
both
Raven?
Raven and Punk and Jimmy Raven Punk. But a dog collar match is not a strap match.
Yeah.
And,
yeah,
we saw some
a dog collar match could be a strap match if you use the right dog collar, but
true.
No one ever does, man.
Yes.
No one ever does.
I mean, we've seen in AEW, we've seen a dog collar match, we've seen a strap match, and they're different, and both have their assets, and we didn't get to see that with the strap match. I guess it was just a matter of they thought the cage was there, and that's people get more excited for a cage than a strap. But I think Adam Pearce in particular could have done something cool with a strap match.
I'm glad you said that because I was disappointed that they changed it from a strap to a cage, and I knew this was coming, but maybe it's just me getting older because I was thinking, here's the thing, when I was a kid, I definitely would have been way more excited for a cage match than a strap match. And maybe it's just in my elder years, I've seen so many more cage matches than strap matches that I'm kind of a bit number. It's less of a novelty a cage match to me than a strap match. Or maybe it's because we're living in the glow of still a year ago, Ricky Starks and Danielson having not just one of the greatest strap matches of all time, but maybe just one of the greatest gimmick matches I've ever seen.
Right.
That I'm more in the mood to see someone get hit hard in the strap than the same kind of cage tropes I've seen a million times. And like you, I think you just mentioned this. I was also disappointed because they've really built the strap match well. Adam Pearce we talked about a really good promo the night before building the strap match. So clearly, even as recently as the night before, they still thought they were doing a strap match. And, they really tied it into the Cornette thing, which really started the entire last few months of storylines for Homicide. Cornette famously strapping Homicide. It would have made far more thematic sense. It would have brought everything full circle. A cage is just there because like you said, the cage is on the ring truck. They're in the same city 2 nights in a row, and Gabe probably thought people like cages better than straps. And in that sense, I would bet for most people, switching to the cage match is probably the right call. You can hear that that's a very loud pop when Homicide brings up the idea of the cage match, but you and I probably would have been sitting there going,
well,
we'd be doing the Larry David kind of the gif where he's kind of doesn't know what to think, where he's I guess it's pretty good.
But I will say this, most of the building up of the strap match has happened on promos on the DVD that were not in front of the live crowd that I'm sure nobody had seen yet because, it takes the DVDs always came out on a delay. So there is that too. The crowd had not seen the build up to the strap match yet.
Yeah. Although, do you agree, though, that I do think in general, if you take most wrestling matches, you just do random wrestler A versus random wrestler B, and you say you can see them in a strap match or a cage match. If you Cyber Monday or whatever that WWE pay-per-view was where fans could vote it, I think most often fans are going to vote for a cage match, don't you think?
Yeah, unless you do a good job of building up the reason for the other gimmick, which they did, but nobody saw it.
They should have. You're saying they should have done in the old days, where very rarely in the mid '90s WCW did that gimmick on TV, where it'd be call the hotline and vote on who you want to wrestle who, but they would always really tell. You could really tell who they wanted you to vote for. It's do you want to see Sting get revenge on Vader, or do you want to see Johnny be bad? It's really push. It sure would be great to Sting says he's got something special for us tonight, or you could see Big Bubba Rogers. It was always stuff like that. But that brings us to Samoa Joe defeating Mark Briscoe via pinfall in 9 minutes, 58 seconds after he hit a lariat. So this was, I guess, kind of an epilogue to the Homicide and Joe versus Briscoe's feud, because it feels to me like the real blow-off for that was the elimination tag they did 2 shows earlier. So this feels kind of a weird, extra. I'm like, we might as well get one more match out of this because it really feels like the feud is over. But I do think it would be funny to view this as the secret climactic match of the feud. And instead of the feud being all about like Homicide enlisting Joe to help him against Cornette's henchmen, the Briscoes, the feud was secretly all about Joe versus a guy who keeps jumping off of really high objects onto him. Like that was what the feud was really about. But I don't think this was just an extra match to stretch out things. But what do you think about this, Matt?
I found it pretty disappointing, and my expectations weren't like that high because Joe, I don't know, Joe's mid-card singles matches in ROH in the recent months had not been great to begin with. So, but I know Mark obviously always works his ass off. And he did, but I really think that they saved a lot of the great stuff for like the last 3 minutes. And I thought the last 3 minutes were great, but I thought it was pretty rough before that. I was thinking maybe if that hot final sequence went like 5 extra minutes, this would have been a really good match, but instead it felt incomplete. Like one noteworthy thing about this match in the early stages is Joe gets a very rare "you fucked up" chant directed at him.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever heard that before because he botches a backdrop where Mark basically falls on his head. And like, you just don't see that much from Samoa Joe. Like he's a really professional type of guy.
Could you even make out what happened there? It was so weird. Like the best I could tell, because I watched it a few times, because yeah, it is such a rare botch from these guys. Like it looks like like he and Joe, Mark's running the ropes. That Joe's about going to backdrop him, but they end up on completely different pages, and it just looks like I don't know, maybe Joe raised up too soon or something. But it looks like Mark then basically hits Joe in the head with a knee and like falls like ass over tea kettle over Joe, like not in a clean backdrop way. And like you said, yeah, it gets like a very rare "you fucked up" chant. And I guess that was Joe's fault, but it was just a really weird, obvious botch.
I think you're right about like he just lifted his head too soon. I think that's the simplest explanation. I mean, I don't know the total mechanics of how they usually do that, but that's what it seemed like to me. Yeah, I mean, listen, it happens to the best of them, as proven here. But then they continue to wrestle. Mark is on the mat early. Joe eventually hits the ST Joe in the corner to take back over, and does some of his usual offense. Knocks Mark out of the ring with just like a kick to his side, and Mark goes all the way out of the ring. And then when he returns to the ring with punches, Joe responds with a bunch of slaps. Mark hits an enziguri, then a big splash for 2, and then he gets the springboard splash into the ring for a 2 count. And Joe does a lot more slaps. He's really hitting a lot of slaps, hits a lariat. Mark rolls through a powerbomb into a sunset flip, gets a 2 count off that, and Joe goes right into the STF. At one point, Mark ducks a running clothesline, hits a back suplex and an inside-out double stomp for the 2 count. Then Mark leaps on Joe's back, but Joe puts him on the top rope, hits a leaping kick and a muscle buster. And instead of covering, he picks Mark up, yells, "Noah!" and then lariats him for the win, which was a very cool finish, I have to admit. So, like, those last few minutes that I just described were very good. I'm not going to lie. But, like, just the early part where Mark's working over the leg, Joe messes up the backdrop, it just felt awkward and kind of dull. And so, I don't know. I guess if 3 really great minutes are enough for you to make up for a kind of dull. What was the length of the match? Like 12 minutes, 10 minutes?
I think it was almost just 10 minutes flat. I think it was like 9:58. Yeah, 9:58.
So if like 6.5 kind of boring minutes and like 3 really good minutes is enough for you, then you probably will like this match a lot more than I did. But I just found the first few minutes a little bit rough.
Yeah, I felt this was disappointing too, even by the standards of knowing Joe's kind of picking and choosing his spots at this point in Ring of Honor. One thing I will say before I get into the match, I do want to acknowledge I always feel guilty when I complain about a match when I know someone was hurt, because we did read that report from the night before saying that Joe aggravated his back during this double shot weekend. So he's a little extra compromised here. And also to keep in mind, I guess, not that this is justify. Well, I mean, it explains it a bit. Maybe this was the night before Turning Point 2006, the TNA pay-per-view, which was the second Joe versus Kurt Angle match. So I imagine Joe in the back of his mind's probably thinking, don't get hurt, don't get hurt. I've got one of the biggest matches of my career. The second one of these matches, I'm going to beat Kurt Angle. And in fact, before the match starts, the crowd chants, "Joe's going to kill you." And you can hear Mark say, "I ain't Kurt Angle. Fuck that shit." So, very much a match where it kind of reminded me, oh, that's when this match is happening. It's right before that. But yeah, I thought this was disappointing because even by the standards, like I said, of the standards, because, Joe is frequently on autopilot. But at the same point, one thing I found about Samoa Joe through the years, no pun intended, is that like there are times in his career where he may be diminished, be it like he's physically hurting or he's just not totally motivated, but he still finds a way to be Samoa Joe. And what I mean by that is like there are matches where you can tell he's not putting in 100% physical effort, or he's not being really imaginative and doing, really interesting things, but he's smart enough to know how to do enough and what to do, where he gives you like the aura of Samoa Joe and gives like the average fan that isn't like a jaded Matt or Trevor who are rewatching every one of his matches in a company fan to make you feel like, yeah, I got what I paid for. I want to see Samoa Joe be Samoa Joe. He was Samoa Joe here. And, like he's good at playing the hits, and I felt like this was a match where he didn't even quite give you that. Like this isn't a match where Samoa Joe plays all the hits. This is a match where he plays some of the hits and then he screams Noah and goes to the finish. There's that ugly spot that we've talked about that you don't really see. There was one brief moment late in the match where Joe gave me that Joe aura I want, where you mentioned he slaps Mark a lot in this match. There's one moment where he just starts slapping the fuck out of Mark's face, and then he kills him with a lariat, and this is a lariat before the finishing lariat. And it's just like a level of sudden brutality out of nowhere, and it was so simple, but it just gave me that vibe that I want from Joe, where, you don't have to go physically crazy to give me that vibe, where you're being a killer, you're being kind of scary in the moment. But overall, I would call this like a flat average, and maybe that's me being a little bit harsh because I have higher expectations for these two than, say, a Tank Toland and Ace Ace Steel. But I just, even by my kind of lowered standards, I was a little bit disappointed. But it was not an unwatchable match by any means. After the match, Joe grabs the mic. He says that was his message to Noah when he screamed Noah before he hit the lariat. He called out the biggest and so-called baddest promotion in Japan, and he and Ring of Honor fans have yet to receive an answer. Joe says he's here. Ring of Honor is here. He tells Noah to come get some. Nigel McGuinness at this point walks to the ring. He gets on the mic. Nigel says he has all the respect in the world for Joe, but he doesn't know why Joe is calling out Pro Wrestling Noah over and over. He says, what's your problem? You don't like Japanese people because you got your ass kicked in 0-1, which actually gets like pretty big like ooh reaction from the crowd. So this crowd's like, I was like impressed. I was like, oh, this crowd isn't all like Johnny Come Lately fans. Like they remember enough to know, oh yeah, Joe, you started out like in 0-1 a few years ago. Nigel says if Joe has a problem with Noah, he has a problem with him because he's wrestled for Noah and he's damn proud of it. Nigel says Joe doesn't need to wait for Noah to summon somebody because he's right here, right now. And then Nigel reiterates he has all the respect in the world for Joe, but he'll set up. He says anytime you want to fight Joe, set it up. Joe, I think says he has, you have a deal, Nigel. But I think at one point I couldn't quite hear. I think he called Nigel Frenchie. I'm not sure.
I think you're right. He does call him that. Yeah.
I was like, you called him Frenchie? Like what? What? I don't know. But
maybe it's like because like the British and the French have sort of like a rivalry, so it's like calling a British person Frenchie is a big insult. Maybe.
This is the day that everybody gets renamed after B-tier WWF manager. So Matt is now coach. Nigel is Frenchie. Everything is old is new again.
Someone is going to be kimchi, and it's not going to be me.
Did you see? I was looking around that there's an indie wrestler now whose name is Teriyaki.
No, but I like it.
I feel like
if I was a promoter, I would have all of my wrestlers named after food, and I know you'd be down with that, Trevor, because
absolutely.
Because not only do you like food analogies, but you are coming to the chili cook-off.
Of course.
Yes. Also, speaking of paralleling, what's happening currently as we record this, as Joe is trying to get Noah to come to the U.S., so now in 2024 is WWE.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the other way around. I don't know, but.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely playing hardcore footsie, those two promotions right now. Absolutely.
Yes.
That would never go wrong for someone working with WWE. You know, it's going to go good. Austin Aries and Roderick Strong defeat Christopher Daniels and Matt Cross, escorted to the ring by Allison Danger and Matt Sydal. So even with his injured leg, he's still cornering his friends. And Aries and Strong win in 1851 when Aries pinned Cross after a 450 splash. Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer, Matt Cross turned the corner with the promotion with his performance over the weekend. And that was interesting because I thought, like, if you watched, you know, like, first off, like they mentioned earlier, the story of this match is this was supposed to be tag title defense of Cross and Daniels and Sydal versus Aries and Strong, but Sydal got legitimately hurt. And so Cross being the partner makes a lot of sense because, yeah, Cross had just had that singles match with Daniels and they just had that 4-way the night before. So it makes a lot of sense that Daniels would be like, yeah, I'm impressed with this kid. Let's bring him in. But to me, it's funny to hear Dave say, like, oh, he really earned the stress of this weekend because comparing and contrasting, I felt like the 4-way the night before was a match that overachieved a bit in terms of fun. And it felt designed like in a laboratory to get Matt Cross over. Like everything about how it was structured felt like this is Matt Cross's match. And this match to me felt like a ton of 2006 Ring of Honor tag matches for good and bad. And it felt like a match that Matt Cross just happened to be in. Like if you watched Cross in the 4-way the night before, you'd come away thinking this guy has to be a regular in Ring of Honor. If you watched him in this match, I think you'd come away going, yeah, he's a solid wrestler. He showed some flashes of being like a really good athlete, but I don't think you'd have that same, oh my God, like Matt Cross has to, I want Ring of Honor to book Matt Cross on the regular. You'd be like, yeah, he looked okay. Like a ton of 2006 ROH matches, the body of this match is that kind of mid-tempo from the get-go. And it has that same kind of pattern that so many of these matches in 2006 Ring of Honor have, these tags where, you know, they do the double hot tag where one team has a guy get isolated for just like 2 or 3 minutes. They make a hot tag. The other team does it. They make a hot tag. Then they go to the final 5 minutes where everyone's running and doing the hotter stuff. And something about watching that structure for like the 80th time this year really crystallized for me, like, the difference between so many Ring of Honor tag matches of this era and like the difference between them and the old school tag matches that they're kind of emulating. Because, you know, the hot tag, what they would call like the Southern style tag, you know, that's a very old school structure of a tag match. And Ring of Honor, technically a lot of these tags are doing that. But what I would say is like they don't really feel it in their bones. Like what I mean is, so many of the matches of this era, like they have the heat sections and they have the hot tags, but there's not a lot of emotion to them. Like they don't really build to the hot tags. There's not like the spots where guy finally like breaks free that, you know, don't really feel often triumphant. They feel just kind of like, oh, it's my turn to get out of here. And you're not really like, they don't really tease a lot of times like the false tags as much as you'd want. They tease it a little bit in a lot of these tags, but it's like, they feel like they're doing these hot tag sequences in these matches because that's how tag wrestling's been done for 20, 30 years, and they're not really getting why these hot tag sequences are done, which is not just to fill time, although that's partly why, because everything in wrestling is to fill time, but it's because it's supposed to build emotion and entertain. You're supposed to feel sympathy for the guy getting beat down, and you're supposed to be teased a few times on them making the hot tag until you can't take it anymore and you're just dying to see it. And then the hot tag is supposed to be this super dramatic turning point. And in so many of these tag matches, the beatdowns don't last long enough. They're not mean enough. They don't tease the hot tags enough so that you're really dying to see them. And then the hot tags often aren't even the turning point in these matches anymore. And then the fact that in so many of these tag matches, both teams get a hot tag like that instead of like just one team, like the babyface team, it's another thing that kind of makes it feel less special. And so watching this match, it was just like I had seen this so often now. I was like, they're kind of structurally doing what you want, but they're just not committing to like why you would do that kind of stuff. But
well, Trevor, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but like,
no, go on.
The most obvious reason that you don't feel the emotion is because there's no heel and babyface. Like,
yeah,
obviously, like the structure was built up to be like the heels are dominating a sympathetic babyface and possibly cheating at that. And so you want the babyface to tag his heroic partner who will take out the dastardly heels. That dynamic is not transferable when you have two babyface teams that, you know, people like, but no one feels that passionately about.
That's a really good point that I didn't think of. And I guess why you would notice that is because like a lot of the indie modern like wrestling style matches that we see, like singles matches, they don't really require a guy to be a heel and a face, right? Like a lot of those matches, the way they're worked, they work fine if it's two guys you like. But yeah, like I didn't think of it till you said, but you are absolutely 100% right. Like, yeah, like a Southern tag match structure, it's kind of built on the idea of someone you love getting denied by someone you don't like. And yeah, it's hard to get that emotion when no one is the heel, really, because no one in this match is supposed to be a heel, like you said. So yeah,
yes, and not only do you need someone to be a heel, you need someone to be like a baby face, like somebody that the crowd cares about, like a real baby face.
You need someone to be Ricky Morton, where they're like reaching out to the fans, through the ropes, like in pain, like just they're begging, like someone that's really lovable. And I never really, like, when Matt Cross was getting beat down, I never really felt sympathy until there was one spot where Strong and Aries just chuck Cross really hard into the barricade, and I felt sympathy for him then during that section of the match. But I was like, I didn't feel sympathy because he was doing like great acting or emoting or because or anything like that. I just felt sympathy because they really threw the hell out of him into something hard, But like a traditional Southern like tag is about making you feel that kind of sympathy for like 10 minutes, and then paying it off. But yeah, these matches don't do that a lot. But there are things I liked about this match. I thought that criticism was something that really came to me watching this match, but I could give that to a lot of these ROH 2006 tags. But there were things I liked about this match. Like, I thought Roddy really came off as a bit more of a bully than usual. Like, he threw Cross stomach first on the top rope, and then instead of like just doing an immediate slingshot suplex, he kind of waited for a second and then basically like herked him up into like a deadlift into a really hard vertical suplex. And I thought that was one of those moves that just really showed off like his sneaky strength. How would you know he's strong? I don't know, but apparently he is. He hit Daniels with a running boot that was fantastic. Like, Roddy, his running boot almost always looks good, but like when he times it and perfectly and it's real fast and the camera hits just right, like 1 in 5 just looks insanely good. And this was one of those 5 where it's just, man, that's a great looking running boot. I thought the final 5 minutes were fun. Like the stretch once Christopher Daniels gets the hot tag were pretty good. Like, Daniels just busted out a bunch of stuff quickly here, but I am just overall good, decent action, but I'm just really fatigued by these mid-tier 2006 RH tags. They feel samey to me. I would give this like the Joe Lanza themed Gentleman's 3, where you're like, this didn't really grab me, but it's good enough that I kind of have to give it 3 stars. It's a flat good to me, but that's why, again, maybe I'm taking it out on this match. This is the one too many of these matches I've seen, but what'd you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would go above 3 stars. I think it's better than that. But I agree with you that Matt Cross looked good, but didn't like blow anybody away. I actually think that Daniels has been looking good in these matches. I think that, I think he's been better in these tag matches than he has in singles matches. But I overall agree with your thoughts that it didn't feel like it stood out from like the pack of these kinds of matches. And Matt Cross did some cool stuff, but he still felt like a lesser replacement for Matt Sydal, if that makes sense. Because Sydal's been in a million of these, and I feel like he turns it on a little bit more. But I did like the finishing sequence, because those are always good, and Aries and Strong are good at them. But it almost feels at a certain point like they can sleepwalk through them.
Yeah.
You want to get something different. As far as like some other like noteworthy stuff in the match, it was interesting that you actually got to hear Dave Prazak do a pervy comment toward Allison Danger here.
I know.
You don't hear that.
Wasn't
very
that
often.
crazy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. He might have just been like teasing his friend, but it still was crazy to hear. He goes like, so Gabe says, if you didn't come to tonight's show, you're going to miss the steel cage match, the elimination match. And Prazak says, you're also going to miss Allison Danger's skirt, which is like, whoa, Dave Prazak? Really?
I was like, did they Freaky Friday that moment? Like, did Gabe pop it to his head? Yes. I was like, I was insane. Like, Gabe was being straight-laced, and Prazak was like, hey, how about that lady?
Very surprising. Another noteworthy part on commentary, Gabe just randomly goes, whatever happened to Donovan Morgan, Dave? Referencing, Daniels' original tag team title partner. And Prazak tells him that he showed up in FIP recently, and Gabe says, did he really? I must have missed that. So I don't know what the inside joke was there, but it was odd. But yeah, so I would probably go more toward like the 3.25, 3.5 star range for this match. But yeah, I mean, it's nothing that anyone probably remembered, and yeah, and not the stronger of the two Matt Cross performances of the weekend.
Couple other things I noticed, like Matt, this is speaking of Alice in Danger and doing sexual things. This is one of those moments where I realized I'm getting old, Matt, because there's a moment, again, they cut to this specifically because they're pervy and they're selling sex, but there's a moment where Alice in Danger's like, she's got a lollipop during most of this match, and there's a moment where they cut to her with the lollipop, and she's screaming at the ref with the lollipop in her mouth, and a lot of people would be like, ooh, phallic. And I was like, she could choke. like I was concerned. Like my thought was nothing sexual at all. It was like, it's a bad idea to be talking with hard candy in your mouth. I was like, take that lollipop out of your mouth, woman.
Trevor, while I appreciate your concern for Alice in Danger, there's nothing that is ever going to get me to stop thinking of you going, ooh, phallic. Because I do not think that's something that anyone says or thinks.
Matt, you should see me whenever someone orders a banana split. That's the first thing I say.
Ooh, phallic.
You want to have sex, don't you?
All right, well,
no, I just want.
I think specifically your use of the term phallic in that moment, which I associate with like Freud, and you're just like being like it's some really sexy thing, a word that people are using. Like I don't know, but I feel like if there's ever a Trevor Dame T-shirt, that's going to be part of the original series.
Creepy Trevor Dame. Creepy Trevor Dame is my least favorite character on this show.
Ooh, phallic.
Oh God, just sexually suggestive. Tell me about your history with your parents.
No, it's the word phallic that
is
what makes it, Trevor.
I'm going to try and never say that word ever again.
It. Well, I've just said it like 7 times, so thank you for that.
So the other thing to notice is just a really weird thing. I noticed it I'm only pointing out because I so rarely notice it. There's a really noticeable edit during this match, and I have no idea what they cut out. But if you see right before Roddy hits Cross with an inverted fallaway slam, there is like a clear edit, and like a little bit jarring. And I'm sure ROH has done other edits. I mean, I've noticed a couple, but usually I don't notice them. This was like a mid-match. They cut something out. I don't know what, but they cut something out. I couldn't divine anything from live reports, but after the match, Aries jaws to Daniels off mic, and we can hear Daniel say to him, "You've earned your shot. You'll get it." So, they're setting up the tag time match, which actually won't happen for a few shows, I think. It's going to be a while now to pay it off. And it's now time for intermission. We go backstage to see a close-up shot of Jimmy Jacobs crusted over like bloody corner of his eye / temple. Dave Prazak's there to ask about the status of his eye, but before he can answer, Lacey interrupts to say she doesn't care if Jimmy bleeds to death in the ring. He needs to take out BJ Whitmer and Colt Cabana. Prazak asks, "What's going through your mind right now, Jimmy?" And Jimmy says, "The eyes are the window of the soul, and he's bleeding right now. It's because Whitmer broke that window. The blood doesn't come from his eye. It comes from his soul. Colt Cabana's done more damage to his heart than any one human should have to endure. So tonight and every night on, Jimmy will wear the blood, his bleeding body, his bleeding soul, his bleeding heart." And this was definitely like, this was a reminder like, Jimmy Jacobs is going to full emo Kiss to Kill Jimmy Jacobs. It's starting.
And doesn't he actually like paint on like something that looks like that blood streak in future matches? I got to watch again to see.
Well, I was going to ask you for the main event, when he comes out again, I was like, is that just the dried blood still on, or did he like emphasize it with like paint or something? Because it looked almost even more vivid, like. Yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah, I was wondering if like that's like ad-libbing or if it's like he like planned to bleed that way, which doesn't seem possible. So it almost.
I think some live report suggested that Jimmy got busted open hard way from BJ Whitmer during that opening scrum, but clearly he made a decision with the promo, and then in the main event he comes back out. I'm going to leave this like this if it was an accident,
Right. It's almost like too convenient that it was an accident, but just shows if that's true, like it just shows like the kind of like this, seizing the day by Jimmy Jacobs to be like, I could use this, because I mean he could, and it did work, and it made it added some dramatic effect to everything. So
yeah,
that's I guess there's a lot of interviews with Jimmy Jacobs out there. I should listen to one to see if that's something he ever talks about.
And that brings us to the steel cage match. Homicide defeated Adam Pearce via pinfall in 15 minutes, 23 seconds after he hit a lariat. Matt, this was the big. We talked about before how we would have loved to have seen a strap match, maybe a bit more than a cage match. We got the cage match. What'd you think about it?
Well, I guess I'll start at the beginning. First of all, Gabe touts the new camera angle inside the cage, which is like, it's a cameraman. He's just standing on the apron, a very brave cameraman. But, this is, ROH is beefing up their production to 1983 World Class Championship Wrestling levels, getting those close-up shots. At one point, Homicide's like, "Where's my fork?" And I'm like, he lost the fork, but then I realized that it's like a part of a gimmick where Todd Sinclair is hiding it from him, which I don't know why he would in a cage match, given everything, but I guess at one point doesn't Gabe say like, "That's why people hate you, Sinclair," or something like that?
Yeah, I was like, wow.
Yeah. But, the crowd is, of course, mean to Todd Sinclair. And at one point, someone throws a fork into the ring, and Gabe says that it's a fan. That can't be true, right? Like, somebody had to be there to throw the
Well,
fork
it didn't seem like, to me, it seemed like a plastic fork.
Yeah, okay.
So probably someone maybe from concessions or something, or maybe if it's a real metal fork and someone's just bringing cutlery with them, I want to know that person's story.
I also certainly would not use it because that is not hygienic. I'm sure also the actual fork also not hygienic, but can't be as bad as Abdullah the Butcher's fork, whereas people have accused him of having forks that are contaminated with diseases. So
yeah, I would say everything almost is an upgrade.
Yeah, I'd say anything is an upgrade. But yeah, so then Pierce calls for a weapon of his own, and Hagedorn comes down, and this is my pet peeve about these kinds of cage matches. Shane Hagedorn comes down, he just opens the door and throws in the strap. I know, I'm they haven't had cage matches that have really followed the logic of a cage match since probably before I was born, but it still annoys me. It's the whole point of a cage match is they're locked in, no one else can interfere. You can't just open and close the door. Am I the only one that's still annoyed by this stuff?
And what I also I didn't necessarily hate the weapons here, but I am also an old fighter. I completely agree 100% with that. But also, do you feel like a cage match, shouldn't a cage be enough? It feels like so many cage matches now have to have plunder in them.
Yeah.
Edge just broke his leg because he had to jump off the top of the cage through a table. Do you really need, in my day, I am so old, the theme of the show other than phallic is old. In my day, do you need plunder? Isn't a cage good enough for you, son? Why do you need all this other shit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can appreciate the fork and the strap because, the fork is Homicide's signature weapon and the strap has been built up. But then there's a part of me that's they should have just done the strap match then. But yeah, I was mainly annoyed by just the opening the door. It's what, why is there a door then? Why is there a cage? What's the point? Why are they doing that? But Hagedorn slams the door on Homicide's head, and Homicide immediately has a lot of blood on his head. So I guess he bladed prior to being hit with the cage. And then Pierce bites his forehead, works the cut. Pierce gets busted open when Homicide slingshots him into the cage. He does a pretty good blade job. And then Homicide starts attacking Pierce with the strap, and Gabe says, "You need to be here live to see the blood," which is so funny to me. I will say it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Gabe back on commentary is a blessing for this podcast because we had gone too long without funny things to note on commentary, and here we are again. So Homicide puts up what?
The way you said you need to be here live to see the blood. The way you said that.
The way Gabe said it was funny, though. That's why I said it that way.
I wonder if because these two shows didn't draw as much as the prior Chicago shows, if Gabe was really pushing, it felt like he was really pushing on this night that you need to be here live. So it was he was constantly trying to find reasons. Oh, he's being, you need to be here live to see blood. Oh, you need to be here live to hear a belt. Kind of push whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say if he was advertising to Chicago, the next time they went, they did see blood because it had that Jimmy Jacobs versus Colt Cabana match. But yeah, it's one way to advertise. Homicide puts a bandana back on his head, and while he and Pierce are fighting in the corner, Pierce accidentally elbows Sinclair, and while Sinclair's down, Homicide pulls the fork out of Sinclair's back pocket, and the crowd pops big. So this is when the crowd is really starting to come to life, and they chant, "Fork him up," as he attacks Pierce with the fork. And then Pierce picks up Homicide in a powerbomb position and just runs him into the cage, suplexes him. And then Pierce starts attacking Homicide with the fork. And then they fight on the top rope, and Pierce hip tosses him off. So he's actually busting out some cool offense, Pierce is. Between the powerbomb on the cage, the hip toss off the top rope. He does a figure fork, he does a figure four, which does not get as big of a pop as the fork did. And then Homicide actually, this is a cool spot because they keep reversing the figure four on each other, which you don't really see that often, where they will go back and forth to the point where it even gets like a boo yay reaction, where Homicide reverses it gets yay, Pierce reverses it back, it gets boo, Homicide reverses it back, it gets yay. You should see that more often. I can't think of any other match where that's happened. Can you?
Yeah, I thought the same thought. I was like, why don't people do this more often? Because people love doing the yay boo spots.
Yeah.
But they almost always only do it with strikes. I was like, it was like I didn't even think. Oh yeah, you could do it with this spot. They do it.
Yeah, you could do it with that spot. You could do it with like other holds. I think it's someone who's listening to the podcast, steal it. Do it now. Right now. If you're listening during a match, you should do it right now. But Homicide superplexes Pierce off the top rope, gets a 2-count off that. And then Pierce drives Homicide headfirst into the cage after Homicide charges at him. And he tries to escape, and Homicide runs at him, hits him with the torso with the strap, cutters him off the top rope, hits a lariat to the back, hits a lariat to the front, gets the win. The ending felt actually kind of abrupt to the point where the crowd didn't really pop. I don't know if you noticed that, because I think people expected more like near falls at that point.
Yeah.
But I think it was a good cage match overall. Like, I did miss the strap match. I think they could have done something with that. But you did feel the hate. I thought it was better than the cage match, I think, between Joe and Danielson, in my opinion. It just felt more like what a cage match should feel like to me. And then Pierce did some cool and different offense. It didn't have a screwy finish at all. And, as always these days, it would have been better, I think, with a little more intensity from the crowd. But I do think this was Homicide's best singles match since the Necro Butcher match at Ring of Homicide. I think I could say that pretty confidently because I can't think of another one that comes close. So I was fairly happy with this.
Yeah, I like this too. So like after I just talked about that last match, the tag match, not having like enough old school psychology and touches, I felt like this cage match, other than throwing the weapons in and not respecting the sanctity of no one gets in the goddamn cage, I thought this was pretty old school, which makes sense given that, Adam Pearce is a pretty old school wrestler and Homicide has a lot of appreciation for the past. Like, I feel like sometimes with modern cage matches, they're just regular matches that have a few cage spots bolted onto them, or sometimes they go almost the other way where it's like the whole point of the match is just to do one crazy, like, top of the cage spot. I felt like not here. Like, this is a cage match where the cage is the point from start to finish. Like, right from the start, they're trying to ram each other into the cage, and there's plenty of that, but then there's the double juice. There's scraping your opponent's head into the cage. There's, getting the door slammed on your head. There aren't even many attempts to escape the cage, and the ones that are there are mostly just to, like, facilitate someone doing a move off the top rope when they get caught, like the great, like you mentioned, Adam Pearce hip toss off the top rope, stuff like that. And they managed to get the ghetto fork in. Like, so, you get the strap in, which at least they paid lip service to the strap after, building it up so much. You get the fork. And again, we talked about before, I would have preferred to have seen a strap match, but I enjoyed this for what it was. I really liked the figure four spot, like you said. I thought this was like on the border of like good to very good, like 3.5 to 3 3/4 stars. Like, it didn't quite have quite the number of big spots as maybe other modern cage matches. Although, like you said, Adam Pearce does do like a couple badass spots here that are cool in any match. But I do feel like it felt like a grudge match and not just two guys doing a cage match because they had to do a cage match. I get what you're saying, that it would have been nice if the crowd was a little more emotional for it, but I did feel like you got some hatred and a little bit of grit to this match, which is what I want from a cage match. There were a couple weird points, though. First thing I'll say is, right after Homicide starts bleeding, which, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned where Homicide got the cage slammed on his head and he immediately starts bleeding. I like you emphasized that, because I was looking, I was like, was that hard way? I was thinking, no, because that's too perfect, but I couldn't see him bleed. So I was like, either he bladed super quickly and super covertly, or it's like you said, he bladed right before, and I just didn't notice. But like
That it had to be that he definitely bladed before it because of the amount of blood that was there after it got hit. It had to be before.
But like, yeah, like it's one of those things where I don't notice it before, but as soon as the cage hits, like I see he starts really bleeding. Like, but here's the thing. So right after that happens, where Hagedorn slams the cage, Homicide starts bleeding. You think, okay, this is the middle of the match. Hagedorn just interfered to hurt Homicide. This is where Homicide's going to get beat down for a while. And instead, very quickly, Homicide's not just back in control. He has Adam Pearce in a sleeper hold, and they do the arm drop once, twice, but then the third time Pearce fights out of it. And I know anyone can do that spot in theory, but to me, like that spot's generally for heels to do to faces, because fighting out of the sleeper naturally, putting on a sleeper naturally slows down a match. So that's more of a heel thing. And fighting out of it's like a dramatic kind of comeback for a face. And here was like, it was the exact moment of the match where you think Homicide's going to start getting beaten down. And instead, a bleeding Homicide's like, I'm going to take control and give like Pierce something to fight out of that slows the match down. I just thought it was a weird choice in the middle of the match. And I thought the other weird thing was, you mentioned it, Homicide puts his bandana back on when he falls off, and he does it multiple times during the match. Like, it keeps falling off, and he keeps putting it back on. And I thought, why is he doing that? Like, Game on commentary, he does a good job of explaining it from a kayfabe standpoint. He just goes, that's a good bandage for the cut on his head. But in non-kayfabe reality, it's like the opposite logic, right? Like, if you're going through the trouble of bleeding from the forehead, why would you want to cover any of that up, right? Like, you want to get your money's worth from cutting yourself. And he did like 2 or 3 times, to the point where like there's one moment where Pierce is climbing the cage and Homicide gets up and he goes to stop him. But before he goes to stop him, he takes like 5 seconds to put his bandana back on and just watch Pierce. I was like, that's how committed he was to putting the bandana back on at points. And I was starting to think, like, does the bandana end up being like a key plot point to this match? And I forgot that. But like, no, it just falls off a third time and he doesn't put it back on finally. But I was like, that was a little bit weird. But I would say overall, this is what I would want an Adam Pearce Homicide cage match to be, and I don't want something that's like state of the art. I want 2 guys beating each other up with a steel cage, getting bloody and battered. They delivered on that. Homicide is getting the next world champ chance before and after the match. The figure 4 spot was great. The camera guy, revolutionary match to have a camera guy in the cage. And also, if you want some of the most obvious called spots in Ring of Honor history, maybe because the camera guy had to be right in the cage on the apron the whole time, but you can see Pierce calling a lot of spots to Homicide. At one point, you can literally hear him clearly telling Homicide knee lift before they do a knee lift. So after the match, Homicide points at his shoulder, says this pain isn't going to stop him from final battle. And then, Matt, we get a delightful little – it just tickled me a little bit. It's a little live note from Chris Vetter, again, who wrote into the PW Torch. And he wrote at this point, the cage was quickly taken down. Fans applauded at how quickly this happened. I love the idea that the fans were like, you did a great job.
Well, I was going to make this logistical point because historically when ROH does a cage match, because they don't have the ability to lower and raise the cage like they do in like the big budget promotions – the cage match is always at the very end, and they always save intermission till the very end so they could put up the cage. This is the first time I think I can ever remember that they put up a cage in the middle of the show. No, actually, no, I'm wrong. It's the second time because they also did that for the first scramble cage match at Main Event Spectacles. But it's unusual for them to put up a cage and take it down mid-show. So maybe it is worth applauding the guys for taking it down very quickly because it's not typically what they do.
And it's interesting because you probably could have main evented the show with this. I mean, maybe at the time, maybe that's easy for me to say knowing this match turned out to be pretty good. Maybe at the time, Gabe's wondering, I don't know if this will be what. But in theory, you could have main evented the show with this. But
true.
Yeah, they take it down. We get 2 more matches. We then get an ad for ROH's line of straight shoot interviews, which whenever I see these, I'm always like, hey, remember shoot interviews? It's always like, I remember when those were such a huge deal to me. So it's always like a little blast from the past when I was like, oh, remember when you paid $20 for a podcast and you waited for it in the mail for days and you had to rewind it? And as always, I'm old.
But I will say this, there's something about shoot interviews that we don't really get anymore. The podcasts where they interview wrestlers are usually shorter. they usually are a little bit more surface than some of the best shoot interviews. I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel
and
like
more
they're
conversational. They're not
yeah,
like, hey, let's go over everything from start to finish.
yeah. I feel like there's something that there was something about shoot interviews that I kind of miss. Like I don't think that like it was just some weird era that like like I don't point is I wouldn't mind seeing some more modern wrestlers do like an old school style shoot interview where they really get into the depths of their careers. That's all I'm saying.
No, I agree. And I also thought it was a weird transition when more wrestlers started doing other people's podcasts and giving away the stuff they would give in shoot interviews. Because I get, look, it's just changing of the times. But I was thinking, like, financially, you're giving away stuff you used to probably be able to sell for like hundreds of dollars, if not for some of the bigger wrestlers, like, in the low four figures probably. And you're now giving it away for free, 20 minutes at a time. Like, think about like when John Moxley, did, first left WWE, and he did like The Observer and PW Torch, and there was like tons of quotable things with those, and he went over like years worth of history and really told like everything you'd want to know. And it's like, a generation earlier, he would have like sold that probably for a decent chunk of change, and you would have been like, everyone would have been like waiting for the first person to get the DVD and like write a recap of what he said. And now, wrestlers just give it away for free, which in a way better for the fans. But like you said, we don't get quite the same experience now.
Yeah, there's not the level of depth.
Yeah. So then we get our semi-main event, and it's Jay Briscoe defeating Davey Richards via pinfall in 15 minutes, 12 seconds after he hits the Jay Driller. This was a rematch from Suffocation, still one of the weirder Ring of Honor show names. Always great to be reminded that there was a show called Suffocation. And I was not really a fan of that match. I felt like it lacked any real psychology, and it wasn't full tilt enough to make up for that. And the crowd sucked, I thought, for that match. I did not love this match either, but I liked it better than that one. So, like, first off, crowd's better for this match. The crowd last time they wrestled were super quiet at points. Here they're audibly into the match. I think they're chanting, "This is awesome" by the end of it. In terms of psychology or structure, there's more of it in this match. Like, it's still not huge, but like there's more of a structure to it, I would say. Like, Davey really dominates the opening minutes in a fairly hot start to the match, and then Jay gains control and slows the match down for a couple of minutes, and then the second half of the match is them going to their more typical back and forth trading moves with the Z kind of stuff. But I even like the moves with the Z portion of the match a bit more than the last match. I mean, last time they had a match, because maybe just because of the crowd, but I also, there's just moments I like. Like, I like, for example, at one point, Jay has Davey in like a chin lock or sleeper or something, and a fan must have been shouting like, it's, that never wins. And you can hear Jay earnestly shout to the fan, "It's going to work this time." I love that. Like, I love that he was like, the character of Jay Briscoe was really convinced he was going to win a match with a chin lock. I liked Jay calling for the screwdriver in the middle of the match, and it got countered, and then he hit as the second last move of the match. Again, it doesn't take a ton to make me happy, like just simple things like that where you call back things and kind of set things up to pay off later. And so like overall, I would say like this match has a bit more of a brain than their last match, like not a ton more, but this match is like smart enough to barely avoid going to summer school, I would say, if the last match was like just a complete failing grade from psychology or whatever. But I also thought, Matt, this match was a textbook example of the weird personality of a look into the mind of Davey Richards, because he's this weird combo of one part goof, one part screamy jock meathead. Because before the match, he's tying a streamer around his head as a bandana. He's doing the Karate Kid pose. He's trying to get the ref to do this Karate Kid pose and almost succeeding. During the match early on, he's high-fiving an older woman in the crowd in the middle of a beatdown. But then he also does later on one of those classic Davey Richards spots, which is ridiculously stupid, where he just screams out of nowhere, "Time to die!" And then he suplexes Jay Briscoe from inside the ring over the top rope to the floor. But in doing that spot, it's really awkward looking, and he basically like reverse hot shots his neck, like the back of his neck on the rope. It looks like he hurts himself. And it's like one of those moves where it's kind of cool, it's kind of stupid, it's kind of nonsensical. It's classic Davey Richards. And then there's one other weird, dumb thing Davey does in this match that I think I've seen him do this before, but maybe not to this extent. And that's one of Davey's main finishers at this point is the DR driver, which is, they say it's a butterfly brainbuster. But basically, if you haven't seen it, what it is it's a double underhook of a guy's arms, like you're about to do a tiger driver or a pedigree. But then you lift the guy up and you drop him on his head.
I mean, it's like the Death Rider, kind of.
Yeah, off to the side. So yeah, it's like an elevated double arm DDT, like at the Death Rider, or almost like even like a J driller that lands to your side instead of between your legs. But in this match, he does a move that's almost the DR driver, but not quite. He does like a hammerlock instead of the double underhook, and maybe he elevates the guy a little bit more, but he still drops him on his head. It looks a lot like the DR driver, but not quite the same. And then later on, he does something else that looks like the DR driver, but just really quickly out of nowhere, and he doesn't elevate it much. He kind of just snaps it off. And both times, the commentary doesn't call it a DR driver. And my feeling is kind of like that maybe they felt like I did, which is they were like, is that a DR driver or not? Should I call it that? And I feel like why that matters is because finishers have more weight to them than other moves. Like if you know a move routinely ends matches, it has more significance when you see it, and a guy kicking out of it has more significance. And in this match, I had those two moments where I was kind of taken out of the match for a moment where I was just like all of a sudden thinking like, was that the DR driver? Like, is that the finisher? Like, or is it not? Like, why did it look different? And it was just a weird thing. And I think Davey's done stuff like that before. And to me, it's like, if you have a finisher, you should not do a lesser move that looks close. Like, you shouldn't mess around with the finisher unless you really make a point that you're like to really emphasize that you've changed it up a little. Overall, I would give this like a low good. I gave their previous match an above average, so this rating's one notch above it. You know, I wish there was better psychology to this. The crowd clearly liked this match more than I did, but overall, I would say this is a good match if you want to give people an example of who Davey Richards is. Not because of the match quality, because he's had matches way better than this, and he's had matches that were worse and more excessive than this, but I feel like you get like a good sampler of the personality of Davey Richards watching this match.
Yeah, this is one of those matches where you might not be surprised to learn I liked a lot better than you did. Thought it was a really good match, like really, really good. The middle of the match got a little dull, but I really liked the balls to the wall, exciting part at the end. You know, the crowd definitely did help. But they were really going for it, and I felt it was refreshing because I don't feel like we've seen a singles match like that since probably Seidel against Delirious at the end of Survival of the Fittest. I feel like this was sort of analogous to that. They just like did a bunch of big moves, went crazy. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really care about any sort of lack of psychology. I felt like this is sort of something that ROH needs at this point. It's just a match like this where the crowd's going crazy because they're just doing a lot of cool stuff. I think just generally based on listening to the reviews and the way you talk about Davey Richards, I genuinely just enjoyed what he did at this point better than you do by a lot.
That's true. I'm not like, there are people that like Davey Richards, very divisive wrestler. I clearly do not absolutely hate his work at this point, but I haven't been incredibly impressed with him after the Jimmy Rave opener matches. I mean, he's been good enough, but yeah, I'm maybe a little less than I remember him. I'm enjoying him a little less than I remember.
Yeah, I really like what he does. I at this point, like in his matches, we'll see how it evolves, but I think he brings some cool stuff to the table here in terms of in the ring, and I also like his dumbness. I don't even think you mentioned my favorite thing he does in the match, where in terms of character, where Briscoe does this thing where he's spinning all the way around Davey before hitting a clothesline while he's hooking his arms and stuff, and every time Briscoe spins and goes around him, Richard keeps going what's going on? And I enjoy that a lot. But then I also like when Davey gets intense and yells things like "time to die" and suplexes Jay over the top rope, which is the part where you're talking about, where he snaps his own neck and falls over. But that, that I think just it's almost like it's a moment where they say, "Okay, we're stepping it up a bit." And then, another spot which I liked would Richard leaped up to the top rope and Jay runs at him. So Richard's back flips off, lands on his feet, gets hit with the Death Valley driver by Jay while he's about to get hit, he yells, "Oh shit!" So I just enjoyed Davey's running commentary, and I just enjoyed the big moves, the Jay blocking the top rope superplex, hitting a gourd buster from the top. Davey blocking the Jay Driller with the DDT, locking on the Kimura, and the fight to the bottom rope by Jay, and then Davey starts kicking Jay, and Jay stands up and says, "Hit me, bitch!" And they trade strikes until Davey hits the handspring kick, and then Jay pops up and says, "Fuck you, motherfucker!" and hits a Yakuza kick, and both guys are down, and that gets a really good reaction. And it's like, yeah, like we needed to see some more of this in recent months. It's been kind of dry, and I didn't feel like this was dry. And that's when, Mark comes to ringside, which I like. It's like, oh, this match is getting serious. I better come down to help my brother. And Jay starts acting very aggressive, and Davey blocks a superplex and goes for the shooting star press. But Jay gets his knees up, hits another big boot, hits a Falcon Arrow, and then gets the Jay Driller for the win. I just thought that was one of the more exciting sequences we've seen in a singles match in a while. And I'm not really sure why Mark came to ringside because he didn't cheat or anything. But I think it did add a little bit of like, oh, this is important now. And so if that was the reason, that was effective. I thought it was really good. I was pleased.
Well, I think I can tell you why Mark came to ringside, because there's a promo coming up at the end of the show where Davey Richards continues the storyline of like, hey, I'm learning every show that I need a partner, because he uses that as an example of when Mark came to ringside to fire up Jay tonight so he could win. But I think the problem is that I noticed was Mark didn't really do anything. Like, I didn't really feel like Mark did something, or that Jay was in that dire of straits. But I think he just came in the middle of the ring in the match to sell this idea of, oh, Mark coming to the ring was a turning point, and so Davey's going to see that as another example of I need someone, I need a partner, because that's the kind of thing that could help me. And I was also just thinking, like, I could see someone rooting me on if it was like a person I was long estranged from or didn't expect to show up, or someone that I just really wanted to help, start cheering me on. But it's always weird to me, the idea of just a random person that I expect. I was thinking, if I was in a fight and you came to cheer me on, I'd be like, oh, that's neat. But I wouldn't get fired up, because I'd be like, well, I expect Matt doesn't want me to get the crap beat out of me. It's like, this isn't a surprise. If you were like, come on, Trevor, you could do it, I'd probably be like, I'm trying. I'm trying as hard as I can already. I'm not good at this. And I don't know this idea of his brother, who's always around him, is coming in the middle of a random, not that important match to cheer him on. That's going to completely change the tide. But that's, for the purposes of Davey Richards, that's kind of what the story has to be. But it doesn't really come off that way. Davey's nose started bleeding during this match, and we always keep up with the blood, so gotta mention that.
You gotta be there live to see it.
Exactly. You want to see a bleeding nose, you gotta be there live, or me during allergy season. But you can be around me; it's so much cheaper. There was another spot I got into this weird mental tangent where it's where he also high fives the woman in the front row, but he does a spot and a bunch of people at ringside, and a bunch of people get to their feet and stand up, and then one person I guess doesn't, and Davey kind of good naturedly goes, "Come on, you got to stand. You're not standing up." And I've seen wrestlers do that before, and I always thought, there has to have been a time where a wrestler said that to someone and they did not notice they were in a wheelchair or something. Because there are sometimes there's good reasons for someone not to stand up. But I've seen wrestlers do that where it's like, why aren't you standing up? And I could just imagine someone being like, I broke my leg. But that's the stuff I think about during matches, Matt. You're excited by the good moves. I'm thinking about that. After the match, the crowd gives Davey a "that was awesome" chant. And I do think I was the low vote on this, because I think, looking at reviews and what you said, Matt, I do think in general on the crowd, people thought this was one of the best, if not the best match of the night. And that brings us to the main event, which is another match some people thought was the best match of the night. 8-man tag team match, elimination rules. BJ Whitmer, Colt Cabana, Delirious, and Nigel McGuinness, scored to the ring by Daisy Hayes, defeated Bryan Danielson, Jimmy Jacobs, Jimmy Rave, and Shingo, scored to the ring by Lacey, in 32 minutes, 59 seconds. The eliminations are as follows. Jimmy Jacobs was disqualified in 8 minutes, 47 seconds when he hit BJ Whitmer with a steel chair. Jimmy Rave eliminated BJ Whitmer in 9 minutes, 40 seconds when he made him tap out to the heel hook. Jimmy Rave eliminated Nigel McGuinness in 15 minutes, 32 seconds when he made him tap out to the heel hook. Colt Cabana eliminated Shingo in 17:58 via pinfall with a sunset flip. Jimmy Rave eliminated Colt Cabana in 1907 via pinfall when he pinned him with a small package after Bryan Danielson kicked Colt Cabana in the balls. So night-long ball-based psychology for Colt Cabana. Delirious eliminated Jimmy Rave in 26 minutes even via pinfall with the chemical imbalance too. And then Delirious eliminated Bryan Danielson in 32:59 when he made him tap out to the Cobra Stretch, making Delirious the sole survivor. So, Matt, I want your opinion on the match. Before we get to that, I want to talk a bit about the booking of the match, because I feel like we touched on this a bit on the last show, but there's still something I feel like I'm not getting. Like, the idea that this main event's the Chicago Double Shot Saturday show, when usually the Saturday show is bigger than the Friday show, and the Friday show got Joe versus Danielson for the world title in a cage to end that feud, it still makes no sense to me, except for the only thing I can think of is they were running the same city 2 nights in a row, and they wanted to end the weekend on a happy ending. Because this match, this does give you a happy ending, but I also thought, like, why is this a main event? Because ROH like almost never runs a match like this, like an 8-man tag main event, let alone an elimination one. And I know it was originally supposed to be 3-on-3, which feels like even lesser. And then like it does feature a bunch of people who are feuding, so it makes sense in that way. But there's nothing even like materially at stake here. Like, there's no title shot, there's no prize of any kind, no trophy of any kind. And we love trophies. And then you have the weirdness of Delirious being booked to win, and not just win, but he's like winning really strongly here. Like, the match comes down where he's in a 1-on-2 handicap situation against Jimmy Rave, who's getting a big new push, and the world champion Bryan Danielson. He beats both those guys, and it doesn't even build to another match. Like, Delirious and Danielson had wrestled a million times in 2006. Danielson's about to, defend in a really big world title match against Homicide at Final Battle, and then he's going to take months off to heal his injured shoulder. And look at what happens after this match. Like, Delirious doesn't get this giant push after the match. Like, he will still be a featured act that can play up and down the card, but from here he wins and loses mid-card matches. He keeps a feud going with Adam Pearce. He doesn't get another shot at the ROH world title for years down the line. In fact, I looked it up. He doesn't get a shot at any ROH title for the next year, and he doesn't wrestle Bryan Danielson one-on-one in Ring of Honor again until 2009, months after Gabe is fired after is fired from the company. But he beats him clean here. And the only thing I can figure is they were pushing Delirious at this point with the survival of the fittest win and all of that. And they had Delirious lose to Danielson so many times this year that they wanted to give him a Delirious win over Danielson, but they clearly couldn't give him a singles win. So that kind of makes sense, but it still feels kind of weird to me that, like, they gave him such a big win, and there's not like really big things for Delirious in the near future.
No, it's the big win was the culmination. It wasn't to build to anything. It was saying, all right, Delirious, here's your peak. We are ending this year in some ways, like, on a positive note for you. You keep losing, you finally get your big win, and now your story is over. That's basically what it is. It's not like to build, it's to end. Does that make sense? This is the blow-off of their feud.
Yeah.
And yes, this is the peak of Delirious in ROH. This is probably his best moment in ROH. Is this the survival of the fittest, and then this, and then it's all downhill from there. So I think that's probably the logic. It's like, all right, we are ending the Delirious Danielson rivalry by having Delirious finally get a win, but we're not going to go with him as a champion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I did think about that. I guess part of my brain is just wired where, like, if you beat the world champ in any way, big things should be coming for you. But I do think you're right that it is more, this was kind of the end of a storyline, and they just ended it in a way where Delirious could get a win without winning a title. But Gabe also tried to frame it as, he kept going on commentary like, Danielson has frustrated Chicago fans all year by winning title matches against Joe and Roderick Strong and Lance Storm, and he keeps saying, like, tonight, like, Chicago finally gets to see what they've wanted Bryan Danielson to lose. And I felt like that was a little oversold too.
Didn't Danielson lose to Samoa Joe at Irresistible Forces?
Yeah, and also, like, I was thinking, I don't think the crowd was really against Danielson, like, in the Lance Storm and Roderick Strong matches. Like, some fans maybe, but, like,
I
Bryan Danielson.
I don't know. I think that people were rooting for the title change in both of those matches mostly. If you actually look at the crowds down the stretch.
But I do get what Gabe was trying to do. I think he's trying to create this fake narrative where, the Chicago fans haven't gotten this catharsis all year, and they finally get it here on the last Chicago show of the years. Like Danielson loses. But like you just mentioned, Joe beats him at Irresistible Forces, which I think is in Chicago. So
yeah,
that's what set up the cage match the night before.
Right, exactly.
So anyway, we talked about the booking now. What do you think about this as a match? Again, a weird match for Ring of Honor, and basically the closest they get to Survivor Series.
Well, the match is the booking, like this match is all about the stories. It's not really like some deep wrestling match. And, it's probably, as far as a single match, probably the best booked piece of business that they've done maybe since Cage of Death. Just in terms of like the little ins and outs and getting the crowd going and, so I'll go through the match. First of all, I love that in this era, the teams come out together and instead of all getting their own entrance. I like that, they emphasize like the entrances are not what matters in ROH. So we don't need to have everyone's entrance. Like they do pay lip service to the idea, like they do a little medley of everyone's music, but they all come out together. I appreciate that. I wish AEW would do that more. They do it sometimes, but I've still seen matches where everyone gets their own dramatic entrance, and I don't know. I'm over that. The entrances are cool, but I like the idea of, emphasizing the matches more. I like that at the beginning of the match, Cabana works Shingo's mullet. I feel like that might be the only match where I've ever seen somebody like working the hair like in that way, where he tells the ref to check it like there's a weapon in it, and then at one point Shingo grabs it while Shingo tries to running the ropes, and he gets him in a chin lock, and he starts playing with it, like he's really working that mullet. And they have a little bit of a wrestling sequence early. People try to work over Danielson's bad arm, but like you said, 8 minutes in, they're already getting to the storylines because once Whitmer hits Rave with an exploder and covers, everyone gets in the ring, and suddenly we have Jacobs pulling out the spike, preparing to hit Whitmer, but Cabana saves him, which allows Whitmer to get the spike. And then while this is happening, Lacey and Daisy Hayes get on the apron and they start fighting, and Jacobs looks at Whitmer and he yells, "Spike me!" And as that happens, Jacobs moves, and Hayes puts Lacey in the spike's path, so Whitmer spikes Lacey, which is like a really shocking and dramatic moment early in the match. I feel like in modern times you'd actually get a close-up of Lacey bleeding, but we did not get that here. We just got Jacobs grabbing Lacey and taking her away to the back. But that really helped get the crowd into it early, and then back in the ring they try to settle back into a match with Rave and Whitmer, but Jacobs is back really quickly, reappears with a chair, hits Whitmer in the leg, hits Delirious in the head, gets eliminated by disqualification, and then he repeatedly hits Whitmer in the ankle with the chair as the ref tries to wrest it from him. And then Rave uses the opportunity to heel hook Whitmer, and Whitmer taps out. So it's 3-on-3 at this point, and Gabe starts to really put over that heel hook that Rave does. I feel like that example is not great because Rave just did it to a guy who got his ankle beaten up with a chair, but he's like, oh, he beat Nigel with the heel hook. He beat, now he beat Whitmer with the heel hook. So he's really putting that over. Nigel is fighting off all three heels. Rave is able to take Nigel down, target his ankle. They all work over Nigel's ankle. At one point, Nigel almost tags, but Danielson pulls Cabana off the apron and rams him into the guardrail. Shingo does the same thing to Delirious. And then Nigel takes out Danielson with the European uppercut and takes down Shingo with the hammerlock takedown. And then he fires up against Rave and hits the rebound lariat on Danielson after he pushes Rave out of the way. And then Rave uses that distraction to get the heel hook on Nigel, and Nigel taps for the second night in a row. So now it's 3-on-2 for the heels. And Gabe is really heavy-handedly putting over the heel hook at this point because, Gabe has he's not subtle when he wants to put something over. And we see that a lot in this match. Cabana and Shingo go hot and heavy, and Shingo gets a 2 count off a lariat of his own. And on the floor, Rave holds Cabana for Shingo, but Cabana moves, Shingo hits Rave. And then back in the ring, Cabana does the dusty elbows on the heels, but Danielson locks him in a chicken wing. And Delirious saves him with a leaping lariat, and they do like this 2-sided, never-ending story clothesline to Danielson, and then clothesline him to the floor, and Delirious dives onto Danielson, and that's when Rave and Shingo double team Cabana, and Cabana sunset flips Shingo, and Rave tries to stop him from going over, but Delirious clotheslines Rave, and Cabana rolls up Shingo, gets the 3, So now it's 2-on-2, Raven Danielson against Cabana and Delirious. And there's the nice spot where Cabana gets the Billy Goat's Curse on Rave, Delirious gets the Cobra Stretch on Danielson. Rave makes the ropes. It was actually at this point, it's like really nonstop action. It's like it's hard to keep up with. Like this, they are really moving fast, even though this is a pretty long match. There's a lot going on here, and I think that's what helped the crowd kind of stay up for it. There's really no downtime, which kind of is like when you have a 4-on-4 match. It's like you can do that, and not a lot of matches do. Where it's like you don't have to ever stop. There's always could be something happening, and there always is here. Cabana goes for a Colt 45 on Rave. Danielson hits him low. Rave small packages Cabana, gets the 3 count. And now we're down to Danielson and Rave against Delirious. And, Gabe keeps putting over what a roll Jimmy Rave is on. And both heels beat down Delirious until Sinclair makes Rave leave the ring. And even the ROH crowd chants same old shit at Danielson when he does the surfboard, which makes me think that they've just very recently seen the CZW stuff. Whether they want to get in on that, because that was only a chant that CZW fans had chanted at Danielson before that. But Gabe says that Danielson looks better than ever after his tour of Noah, despite his shoulder. And, when they're working over Delirious here, they're like Danielson is sort of getting silly with it. Like Danielson and Rave do simultaneous Rick Rude hip gyrations. At one point, Danielson's like after Rave is choking Delirious, Danielson's like, he has till 5. And then he starts choking Delirious and he's like, I have till 5. And I think you posted on Twitter the little dance and shimmy that Danielson does while he's kind of getting into this whole mode there. So he's really feeling it. You kind of get he kind of feels like waking up a little bit. At one point, Delirious moves out of the way of a Rave Spear, and Rave spears Danielson. And then Delirious rolls up Rave, gets a 2 count. Rave hits a spear on Delirious, gets a 2 count of his own. Then Danielson chokes Delirious with his own tassels. Danielson and Rave hit a double superplex on Delirious, and Rave covers for a 2 count. And then Rave locks in the heel hook, and the announcers mention that it's not fully cinched in, and that's why Delirious is able to get the ropes, which feels like a very 80s Gorilla Monsoon, Jesse Ventura thing. Like, oh, he doesn't have the fingers locked, that sort of stuff. So Danielson keeps taunting the fans when Delirious suddenly hits the chemical imbalance 2 and pins Rave out of nowhere. That was just a very abrupt pinfall. But Danielson's stunned. Now it's a 1-on-1 match. And so Danielson stops fooling around. He gets intense, hits a roaring forearm, hits a dragon suplex, goes back for the chicken wing, lies back, and Delirious fights and makes the ropes. And then they trade a bunch of pinning combinations, cradles. They trade forearms, screaming before each one. Delirious goes for the leaping lariat, but Danielson catches the arm, locks in cattle mutilation. Delirious makes the rope to a very big pop. Delirious starts hitting the elbow. Oh, Danielson starts hitting the elbows, but Delirious fights out, hits his own elbows, hits 2 of his punts. Danielson avoids a 3rd one, hits 2 roaring elbows, puts him up for the belly-to-back superplex, and hits it very well for a 2 count. Then he goes for the elbows again. Delirious makes the ropes. Danielson gets a tiger suplex, rolls back into cattle mutilation. Delirious fights out, hits a somewhat weak chemical imbalance 2, gets a 2 count off of that. Then locks in the Cobra stretch. Danielson's arm drops twice, but he keeps it up the 3rd time, rolls him up for a 2 count. So in this match, he's kind of doing some of the finishes he won previous matches with, like this roll up after his arm drops. That's how he won in Boston. And but Delirious holds on, hits a big Cobra clutch suplex, but Danielson's foot is on the rope. That's a really good near fall. And then he locks in the Cobra stretch again, and Danielson taps out, gets a huge pop. So it's like I said, the culmination of the year for Delirious. And I feel like this woke up the crowd after a months-long slumber. It's almost like I said, almost like a curse was broken. They the match was just super dramatic, exciting the whole way. The fact that they took a match which, like you said, Trevor, did not really have any stakes and made the crowd care more about it than any world title match they've done in months, any grudge match they've done in months. They just, I don't know, everything worked. The Jimmy Jacobs stuff, I think, was really effective. I think that Rave did a good job getting himself over in this new role. I think Delirious and Danielson had one of the best sequences they've had in all their matches. I think Danielson was feeling it more than he has in a while. So I think this just things clicked and the crowd was just ready to embrace it. So I think this came off so much better than it would have in front of a different crowd. But that's what the kind of match this was. It was a storyline match to get the crowd going, and it did. So I thought it was great. I thought it was really well booked, and the booking is really what made it. Although, the performances were certainly good too.
So I liked the match, but I liked it less than you. And, I think, again, less than the crowd and less than people that reviewing it elsewhere. So you know what? Maybe I'm just curmudgeonly on this show, but I did like the match. Like, I would describe like the quality of the wrestling in this match, apart from like the the mini match Delirious and Danielson had, I thought was like the one point this match came close to like greatness in terms of just in-ring wrestling. I thought that was really good. But the rest of the match, the action, like the wrestling, I would describe as amiable. Like it's good enough, but it wasn't really particularly special to me. But I think you made the great point of this is a match that's more about the storytelling than the wrestling, certainly in the body of it. And something we've talked about a lot through the years is, one of Gabe's big strengths are matches like this where they have a ton of people that weave in a bunch of feuds that plant seeds and pay off different things all within one match. And I would say as far as those go, this isn't on the level of, say, the first the crowning a champion main event or the first survival of the fittest match or the cage of death matches, which those are the three matches I think of are like Gabe Sapolsky's like kind of masterworks for booking those kinds of matches. But I would say this one is still a good at that. It's Gabe doing, the thing he's good at, and he's doing it pretty well here. And you went over the main points where, they add a new wrinkle to the Jimmy Jacobs Whitmer feud with Lacey getting spiked and how they use that as a way to get Jacobs out of the match. But then Jacobs attacking Whitmer, sets up Whitmer to lose clean to the heel hook, which is something they want to get over for Jimmy Rave because it's his new finisher. And, so stuff like that, that's an example of how he's really threading things together and using that to create payoffs within this match, and letting the stories like help him book this match in a way. Rave gets to beat Nigel again, which furthers their feud. And the one thing I will say is I didn't like that Rave put Delirious in the heel hook and he didn't tap immediately, and that he got to the ropes fairly easily. I think when you mentioned that the announcer said, he didn't get all of it, I think that was the announcers almost covering for Jimmy, because I feel like when you, like I said this on a recent show, when you debut a new finisher, I feel like you should really protect it and it should instantly win matches for at least for the first few times and pretty quickly too. And this is the second time I've seen Rave do this, where he's using the finisher to win matches definitively, but he's also using it in times like this where the guy's just getting out of it like it's not that big a deal. And I think the announcers there were trying to cover and basically say, well, he didn't really get a great lock on it, so you can't really don't think that the finisher isn't that great. It is. He just didn't get all of it there. And I really did enjoy Nigel's injured leg from the night before being his downfall in this match, and how logically they got to his elimination. Like, he's isolated against the heels. There were 3 heels left at this point. They work over his leg. And then when Nigel finally makes his big comeback, Danielson has taken out Nigel's partners, like beating them up so they're off the apron. So when Nigel finally gains control, he makes this comeback, but there's no one to tag out to. So he has to stay in the match and he gets eliminated, which is, again, very simple, logical booking you can do in an elimination match where he just doesn't have the help he needs at this point. And I did like Danielson shoving Rave out of the way of the rebound lariat before that, because it's one of those things where it protects Nigel, because you think, okay, if Danielson wasn't there, if this was a singles match, Danielson would have been able to shove Rave out of the way. Nigel might have won right there and beaten Rave and gotten his win. But it's also not like when Rave wins, it's not like he won by cheating. He won from the rules of the match. He made him submit. So again, it's a nice fish that kind of protects both guys, So again, all these examples are things I really liked about the booking. I do think it's always a little goofy, like when Danielson shoves Rave out of the way of the rebound lariat, he kind of has to stand there for a second, like a deer in the headlights so he can take it. And it's one of those things with the rebound lariat where sometimes you have to wait that extra second and it can make you look pretty dumb. And this wasn't the worst I've seen, but it still was a little goofy. I thought the action again was just fairly good, but never quite that top level exciting frantic. But then the Delirious Danielson mini match I really liked, and you mentioned it. I really liked that they paid off two of the big ways Danielson beat Delirious. They did the Bret Hart Roddy Piper Mania 8 finish where he walks up the turnbuckles while he's in the Cobra stretch, and this time that beat Delirious before. This time he kicks out of it. Delirious survives the elbows. He throws some of his own this time. And I loved. Like, my favorite spot of the whole match was, Delirious keeps going for the Cobra stretch, and then he does a Cobra clutch suplex that looks so big. I just thought that was such a cool moment. And that and Delirious winning at the end, I thought were the two moments of this match that felt really special. The crowd pop's huge for Delirious winning. And it's like you said, it's a testament to somebody, the booking, how they work this match, something of how big the crowd gets into what on paper should be a kind of a letdown to be a main event of a big Saturday show, to be like, this crowd's ecstatic to see Delirious beat Danielson. And overall, I'd give this like 3.5 stars. So I'm probably lower than you, and probably, I bet you a lot of people, I think, probably gave this more like 4. I'm less than that, but I enjoyed the match. And yeah, I'm just looking over my notes. If you covered most of the stuff, there's that Delirious dive to the floor where he overshoots Danielson, and that's all Danielson can do to kind of steer him a bit as he just flies into the barricade. That looked pretty brutal. You mentioned it. I put it on Twitter. Bryan Danielson does at one point what I can only describe as a moonwalk jig. Like, I was so happy to see it, one, because it was so hilarious, but two, because as a painfully white person, it made me feel like there's at least one person on this earth that has less dancing ability than me, and it's Bryan Danielson. So I was happy about that.
Well, now I've got to see you dance.
Look, I'm horrible, but there is at least one person now on earth I can say for a fact has like less groove and rhythm than I do. But yeah, that was the main event, and now we go backstage to find Davey Richards with a marked up face and neck and a really bloody ear. So I don't know if that's blood from the ear or blood just dripped into it, but it's pretty red. And he says he's been in Ring of Honor for about 6 months now, and since then he's been put against the best that wrestling has to offer, and he's won some, he's lost some, he's learned some lessons. Davey says after his match against Chris Hero, after Chris Hero cost him a match to Claudio Castagnoli by hitting him in the head with a metal briefcase, after losing last night's 4-way when BJ Whitmer hit him while he had Matt Cross locked in the Kimura lock, and after seeing Mark Briscoe fire up his brother Jay tonight after Davey guaranteed victory on the show, he's learned that being one hell of a wrestler is not enough. Tonight he learned he needs someone watching his back. And I just thought I wrote in my notes, how would having someone watching his back prevented him from losing that 4-way last night? Like, there's no one on the outside that could have stopped the thing from happening in the 4-way.
It also wouldn't have stopped him from losing this match cleanly, which he did.
Unless he thinks that someone pumping him up would have made him so pumped up he would have overcome Jay Briscoe. I don't know. But, this is a story they're trying to tell. They're trying to tell you over a few shows now, Davey Richards needs a partner. But we then cut back to the ring where Delirious is celebrating and posing to the crowd, who's still pretty pumped to see him win. Like, they're very pumped up. They're all. I'm not seeing, at least at ringside, of Russia people flooding away. They're pumped to celebrate with Delirious.
And he rips off Dr. Keith Lipinski's shirt.
Yeah, a guy in the front row repeatedly says "Show of the Year," to which I would say, I'm glad you had a good time, but calm down, buddy. Delirious then, hugs former guest of the show, Dr. Keith Lipinski. He pulls off his shirt. You can hear Keith being like, whoa, but then playing along with it good-naturedly. And Delirious throws it over the camera. Delirious even someone has like a pen and a photo or something, or a piece of paper, and Delirious signs an autograph as he gets to the entrance. And that's how the show ends. And I have to admit, that between the pop he got and them showing the post thing and the autograph, Delirious felt like kind of a big star here, at the end, which again, kind of, I get that this was kind of I think you're right. This is kind of the end of a peak for Delirious, but in a way, it felt like he has some momentum on this night. You would watch this show and feel like, oh, he's destined for something. But that's this is kind of the top of the top of the hill / cliff, Matt, for Delirious. But Matt, that brings us to the Matt F. Trophy. Who won the Matt F. Trophy tonight?
The Coach Matt F. Trophy, Trevor.
The Coach Matt F. Trophy.
That's right. I don't think I've given it to this guy before, surprisingly. I'm actually going to give it to Bryan Danielson because there was just a spring in his step that we have not seen in him in a while since he had that injury. And I think it added a lot to this match. He just felt happy and like feeling himself. And then he really turned it on from a wrestling standpoint in that last sequence with Delirious. And it felt like we got like the full Danielson experience for the first time in a while. And I really enjoyed seeing that. So it was almost like we're getting Danielson back. The crowds like seem happy again at the end of the show. So I felt pretty positive about it.
Congratulations to Bryan Danielson. So before we get our overall thoughts, Chris Vetter had one last note from his PW Torch Live report that I thought I'd include. Chris wrote, "This was an excellent show. I spoke with Dave Prazak right after the show, and he said he thought it was the best show since the Mania weekend." Matt, so now I'll ask your thoughts. I'm going to use this kind of a jump in. Like, what are your thoughts, and would you agree?
Well, I'm going to say, okay, it sounds like Prazak was only live at these Midwest shows, right?
Yeah.
So by that standard, maybe, right? Like if you're just talking about like Chicago shows, maybe.
Yeah, if you're just talking about live experiences.
Yeah, I mean, like if he was at the Ohio shows, I think some of those shows that had like McGuinness against Danielson were probably better.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Generation Now or Weekend of Champions Night 2. But just for Chicago, I don't know. It's definitely in the running. I gotta remember what Chi-Town struggle was like in terms of top to bottom. I don't really remember, but it was better than Gut Check. It was better than Irresistible Forces, and it was better than Chicago Spectacular Night 1. Would you agree with that?
My memory's so bad. I'm not sure. I will say this. I thought this was a good show. I feel it's a little bit overrated. I feel like some people think this is a great show. I don't know if I'd go great. I feel like maybe maybe people are overrating it because if you watch the last show right before this one, this is a noticeably better show than that one. And we've been in a bit of a funk with like rare bright spots. So in that sense, I feel like maybe the show comes off better than it is a little bit because it is kind of a little bit refreshing.
Yeah, but my point is like if you're only judging it based on its Chicago shows, right? Like they haven't been that good since WrestleMania weekend. That's my point. Like if you're judging it from all ROH shows, no, of course it's not even close to the best since Mania weekend. There's so many like all-time great shows since then, right? You had Ring of Homicide, you had the Weekend of Champions shows. You had Cage of Death, Death Before Dishonor show. You have Glory by Honor 5 Night 2, right? Like this, the some of the shows in the UK. Like obviously, this was not the best show since Mania weekend. But what I'm saying is the standards of Chicago shows has dropped a lot since then. So this might be the best one since then. So I think if he means the best show in Chicago, I actually can see it. That's all I'm saying. As far as overall show from top to bottom, I really did not think much of the show before intermission. I didn't think it was much of anything. I think after intermission, all three matches delivered to various degrees. You know, still not like anything like absolutely must see, but I thought there were two really, really, really good matches in the Jay Briscoe and Davey Richards, and then also the elimination match. And I thought that the cage match was pretty satisfying. So I think that post-intermission sequence was good and one of the better runs they've had in a while. And the crowd for the main event in particular felt like it finally like woke up to like the point where like it sounded like an ROH crowd, whereas like it just everything sounded very dreary for the past few shows that we've reviewed, and I'm glad to see that people reacting to stuff again and having that feeling like they went home really happy, which you haven't gotten a lot in some of these recent ROH shows.
Yeah, and while I gave some of my thoughts already, I'll just say, again, I thought it was a good show, not a great show, maybe a little overrated. But if you listen to this, I think I'm underrating this more than most people because you've heard how I probably liked a couple of these matches a little bit less, the couple of the top two. But the thing I would say about the show is it has an energy some of the shows, including the night before, had been missing. And I think in that sense, like changing things around, having that kind of impromptu segment to start the show where a match gets changed on the fly, changing it to a cage match, even if you and I are strap fans, like we would have loved to have seen a strap on, but we got a cage and it was funny good.
We would have loved to see a strap on this DVD.
Exactly, but I feel like in that sense, mission accomplished. They got some. This was a weekend that if this had been like the night before, it would have been the deadest weekend I can remember in Ring of Honor history. And they definitely injected some energy into the show at multiple points in the crowd and by the end of the night. So mission accomplished on that in that regard.
Yeah, it was an exciting show. I mean, nothing that's going to get you to say "ooh, phallic," but it was pretty exciting.
God damn you! So speaking of phallic, speaking of strap-ons, it's time to get to plugs. All the range of toys are here. Through the years at gmail.com is for our email, THROH for through, of course, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. Next time on the show, Matt, we have one double shot left, and then we are done 2006. But before we can get to Final Battle, the big one, the year-end show, the awards, everything, we have to do International Challenge, but maybe there'll be some good stuff there. Shima is back.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I don't remember that show at all. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, there's a big star-studded four-way. Shima's back. Eddie Edwards has his first Ring of Honor match ever, I think. So yeah, there'll be some stuff to talk about for sure, as always on Through the Years. So until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.